If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to MINDSHOCK True Crime. This is your host, Bruce McGuire, and today we are finally tackling one of the most mysterious disappearances in modern history, that of Brandon Swanson. Now, Brandon Lawson gets a lot of attention, but this other Brandon Swanson, even though his disappearance is possibly much more baffling, doesn't get quite the same media attention. Of course, if you haven't checked out the Brandon Lawson podcast on MindShock, we have a series on that case as well. Check that out. But here we're taking a look at Brandon Swanson. This is also one of the most requested cases on MindShock. Some people believe there's a paranormal or supernatural element due to the nature of his vanishing. And again, this is MindShock, where we go down every avenue and every theory, but let's exhaust the more conventional theories and avenues first, so to speak. In typical MindShock fashion, with logic and reason at the forefront. If you want to help support MindShock, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Help us get more mind-shocking content out there and keep up awareness in missing persons cases and unsolved cold cases. That's what gets them solved. Awareness. A like and share. Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcast requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. You could also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Support the channel that way. Get access to exclusive streams and chats. And, of course, make sure you're subscribed to the channel to get the latest updates. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. So let's jump right in here. Let's do the initial breakdown before we get into more details here. The disappearance of Brandon Swanson. Right from the wiki. Shortly after midnight, May 14th, 2008, Brandon Swanson of Marshall, Minnesota, drove his car into a ditch on his way home from celebrating the end of spring semester with fellow students from Minnesota West Community and Technical College's Canby campus. Uninjured, he got out, called his parents on his cell phone. Unsure of his exact location, he told them he believed he was near Lind, and they drove out to pick him up. They were unable to locate him. Swanson remained on the phone with them until he went silent 47 minutes later, exclaiming, "Oh, expletive." He has not been seen or heard from since. So this was May 14th, 2008. In Porter, Minnesota. So, 2008, relatively modern times, so we will be examining all available information pertaining to the cell phone data and otherwise. Continuing onward here, in the morning, his parents reported Swanson missing to police, who advised them to wait, as such behavior was not uncommon for young men his age. Really? Being on the phone with your parents, yelling out in an expletive, and then the phone going dead or whatever, and then disappearing and never leaving a trace, that's not uncommon? Wow, talk about bumbling. I mean, wow, this is one of the cases where I'm not sure police corruption is appropriate to ascribe here, but police incompetence? Perhaps. It's not like he just didn't come home and he was at a party. I mean, you can maybe make the case. Of course, this is a case-by-case basis. I mean, certain kids, regardless of age, they would never do that unless something happened to them. And then other kids, of course, if they have a history of doing that, they might do that if they're party animals, whatever. But in this case, he's on the phone with them and then he disappears. I mean, that's not common at all. I mean, how often does that happen? Later that day, the circumstances of his disappearance became more complicated when his cell phone records showed he had been near Porter, 25 miles from where Swanson had said he was, in a different direction. That information led to the discovery of his car near Taunton. It is not known whether Swanson was aware of the discrepancy when he talked to his parents. Foul play has not been ruled out, but it also has been proposed that he might have accidentally fallen into the Yellow Medicine River near where his car was found and drowned, although extensive searches have not found a body. Land searches with dogs have continued in the area for several years. His parents successfully lobbied the state legislature to pass Brandon's law, which requires the police begin investigations of missing adults promptly. And he was 19 years old here, so again, I mean, it's rough. I mean, this is a teenager. This is with the critical detail here. He's on the phone with his parents. It's not like he just went to a party, got drunk, and, crashed at a friend's place. So, yeah, this is a unique situation, no doubt. Background here, a native of Marshall, the seat of Lyon County in southwestern Minnesota, Swanson graduated from Marshall High School in 2007. He then chose to study wind turbines for a year at the Minnesota West Community and Technical College campus in Canby. Classes at Minnesota West ended for the academic year on May 13th, 2008. Swanson stayed in Canby for the evening to celebrate with friends. At two different parties, he was observed to consume some alcoholic beverages, but his friends said not enough to make him seem visibly intoxicated. Okay, now what can we garner from these statements from the friends? So, if his friends were responsible for his death, now again, males that are met with foul play, the statistics there's more of a chance they could have been met with foul play at the hands of a stranger as opposed to a female. Females are usually abducted, harmed, killed, disposed of by people known to them, usually the significant other, or friends, or acquaintances, or coworkers, someone known to them. Whereas with males, the statistics are more skewed, where it's more plausible that a stranger could have harmed a male. So, but if his friends were responsible, wouldn't they say he was drunk? I mean, because then he could have just stumbled somewhere. Why would they say he wasn't? So unless, if they were really his friends and they're telling the truth and he didn't appear to be intoxicated, then they would say as such. So this definitely does not make anyone lean suspiciously in the direction of the friends by this statement. Disappearance. Also, we have to figure out what his parents said when he was on the phone, whether or not he sounded drunk or not. Disappearance. Swanson left Canby for the 30-mile drive home before midnight. Just before 2 a.m., he called his parents on his cell phone, telling them he had driven his Chevrolet Lumina off the road and into a ditch from which he could not remove the car. He was not hurt and asked them to come to where he was and pick him up. Annette and Brian Swanson got in their pickup truck and drove out to where they thought he was, keeping him on the phone despite occasional hang-ups and drops. Brandon stayed with his car and tried to signal to them by flashing his lights on and off, but they saw nothing, nor did he see them do the same. Brandon finally gave up and told them he was leaving the car to walk towards lights he could see that led him to believe he was near Lind, a small town roughly 7 miles southwest of Marshall. He told his father to head for the parking lot of a local bar and wait for him there. Brian began driving there, talking to his son as he did. Shortly after 2:30 a.m., 47 minutes into the call, Brandon suddenly interrupted himself on the phone and said, "Oh, expletive." He was silent for the remainder of the call until his parents hung up and attempted to call back. Brandon has not been seen or heard from since. Okay, so the phone call apparently did not terminate when he uttered that statement, possibly being attacked or whatever happened. So, some people believe he fell into the river. If so, if the phone fell into the river, would it not terminate? Would it continue being connected? Would it not fry? So, I mean, that's interesting there. But if somebody hit him, if somebody didn't see him and hit him with the car, what would they do then if they were so panicked? Like, let's say this is not a serial killer, an experienced criminal. Let's say this is just a panicked individual, possibly drunk themselves. They hit him. Are they going to dispose of the body? In which case, they take the body and they don't hang up the call. I mean, we're gonna examine that theory and others in a moment. I just wanted to add that there because that's the first thought I had there. We have to make it clear. Apparently, the call did not terminate at that moment. His parents hung up and tried to call again. Investigation at 6:30 a.m. His parents reported Brandon missing to the Lind police. They were told at first that it was hardly unusual for young men that age to stay out all night after the last day of college classes. I mean, again, yes, if they're not on the phone with him specifically trying to pick him up. I mean, this is just insanity. Annette Swanson specifically recalled that one of the officers said it was Brandon's right to be missing. Later that morning, the Lind police did start a search but found no trace of Brandon in the town or outside. They requested that the office of Lyon County Sheriff Joe Dahl assist them. To better focus the search, the sheriff's office obtained Brandon's cell phone records, which revealed that Brandon had been calling from the vicinity of Taunton along State Highway 68, the main route to Canby, northwest of Marshall, 25 miles from Lind. Okay, I have to interject again here. What verification is there? I mean, is it possible there was a glitch in terms of the cell phone tracking? I mean, again, we'll take a look at it to see if they can trace the towers, like, let's say, the past 24 hours of the cell phone activity and if it's relatively accurate. But, I mean, this is 2008. Is it not beyond the realm of possibility that there might be some glitch that told them that the cell phone was at a location that it wasn't actually at? I mean, nothing's perfect. I mean, look at 2022 with all the advancements of computers, etc. There's still crashes and glitches. I just want to know, was it just checked like one time, or did they go back and verify all of those pings with a dedicated advanced level team instead of the normal, oh, the cell phone company said it pinged here, boom, they report it to the police, that's it, nobody questions it or verifies it in any kind of thorough investigation of the technical data. So, again, I think that should definitely, because in a certain percentage of cases, all these missing persons cases or whatever, how many pings would cause erroneous or glitchy data? In all of the history of cell phones, I mean, there's obviously going to be a couple, probably a lot more than a couple. Now, I'm not saying that happened in this case. I'm saying if it happened in this case, that might be a clue there. But let's continue. And then, of course, we do the car in the ditch that does match his story. Now, is it possible that the criminals were just, I mean, would they really get his car out of a ditch and put it in another ditch somewhere else? I mean, I don't know. That seems, I don't know how often criminals would do that. But let's continue here. Searching in that area, deputies discovered Brandon's abandoned car in a ditch off a gravel road along the Lincoln County line a mile north of Highway 68, bringing the office of that county sheriff, Jack Vizecki, into the investigation as well. He told the media that the Lumina had gotten hung up on the top of an incline at the edge of the road, not seriously enough to damage the car, but enough to keep the wheels from touching the ground on that side. There was nothing else found amiss with the car, and due to the grass and gravel in the area surrounding it, there were no tracks and thus no way to tell what direction Brandon might have started walking. Okay, so based on the forensics of the car here, it seems probable that it was not restaged it was not restaged. I mean, I don't know, because if they see that there was no other damage, and they can tell that it didn't also go into another ditch elsewhere, I mean, again, going down every single possible theory, I can't put a lot of credence into the theory that the car was restaged. But again, we have to examine every possibility. His cell phone call has been routed through a tower at the intersection of County Routes 3 and 10 near Minnesota, another town along Highway 68. By May 15th, the call had been determined to have come from within 5 miles of the tower. Searchers were concentrating their efforts there. Since part of that circle included Yellow Medicine County to the north, authorities from that jurisdiction also took part. Dahl noted that from the area, a red light atop a Taunton grain elevator could be seen. He thought that it was possible that the red light Brandon had seen had led him to believe that Lind was within walking distance. Ground searches were being complemented with a flyover by an aerial team. Search dogs were also brought in from the Twin Cities. A team of bloodhounds from the nearby Codington County, South Dakota, picked up a 3-mile scent trail that largely followed the fields west-northwest to an abandoned farm, then along the Yellow Medicine River to a point where it appeared to enter the stream. Okay, so this is clearly stating that there is a dog track going directly into the stream. Brandon had mentioned passing fences and hearing nearby water, his father recalled. On the theory that Brandon might have drowned, boats from the state's Department of Natural Resources were deployed along the river and gates were installed. In some areas at Lincoln County, the water had been 10 feet deep on the morning of the disappearance, but had gone down since then, Dahl noted. Deputies also walked the river's banks, and horses and all-terrain vehicles were deployed in the surrounding area. However, Dahl ruled out a more organized, extensive ground search. I mean, what are the logistics here? Like, again, just based on basic physics and the current of the stream. I mean, there's obviously only a certain distance a body could have gotten. I mean, this isn't rocket science. I mean, that particular stream has certain particular currents. You can add a margin of error, and you could really find how far the body could have been carried. So apparently there were gates installed, extensive searches here. Now, Dahl ruled out an extensive ground search. So it looks like they did an extensive search of the river, but just not in all the surrounding areas on the ground. Later searches, or at that time, let's see what the follow-up here is. Later searches after the original search found no sign of Swanson, most efforts were discontinued. Sheriff Vizaki continued to walk the 2 miles of the Yellow Medicine in that area every day for 30 days. Okay, so is anybody really going to claim police corruption here when the sheriff himself, again, if this is verified, he walked that 2 miles every day for 30 days. I mean, this sounds like a guy who wants to figure out what's going on. The Swansons left their porch light on all night, every night, as a symbol of their hope that Brandon would eventually return or be found, and still do. Searches resumed late that fall after fields planted shortly after the disappearance had been harvested. Dogs on those searches continued to follow scents of human remains into an area northwest of Porter that had not been searched earlier. Efforts picked up again in the spring after snow melted, but before planting, a cycle that continued through 2011. By that time, 122 square miles had been searched. I mean, how plausible is it that he made it outside of that search area? Unless, again, there was a hit and run and disposal of the body. Or somehow being met with foul play at the hands of another individual, either in a vehicle or not. In 2010, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension took over as lead agency. It set up a tip line. By 2015, 90 leads had been reported that way. By that point, when official searches resumed, the area of interest had moved towards Mud Creek, a tributary of the Yellow Medicine north and northwest of Porter. Okay, alright. So is it possible he fell into the river, which is about 10 feet or so, he got carried a certain percentage of the way and then exited the river and then walked another distance and then possibly fell and drowned in another portion. That's why the dog track was lost at the initial point where he fell into the river, but he didn't die there because he would have been found there. So is it possible he somehow made it out elsewhere, continued walking, and then possibly fell in another area? Just by all the information here, it seems like they thought that might have been a possibility. Theories. While the trail followed by one of the dogs went to the Yellow Medicine... Okay, so it was only one of the dogs? The other dogs did not track him there? Okay, if that's the case... Because, I mean, dogs are not infallible. I mean, they're really good, but they're not infallible. You do want verification. You do want multiple dogs to be able to follow the same track just for verification. So if this is true and only one dog had this track, that's tough. That's tough to put 100% faith into. Despite her son's last known words, Annette Swanson does not think he drowned there. After following the scent to the water, that dog continued up across the other side and along that riverbank to another gravel road where it continued north towards the Yellow Medicine County line and ended. Okay, now why didn't they mention that detail earlier? I mean, this write-up is kind of weird. There really is nothing to indicate that he's in the river, she told CNN. Brian Swanson also recalls that any alcohol his son had consumed earlier in the evening notwithstanding, he did not seem disoriented or confused during their phone conversations. Okay, so he does not appear drunk on the phone. Interesting. If Swanson is still alive, there are other possibilities, although they appear remote. He could have intentionally disappeared, but his parents do not believe he would have done that. Vizecki said he could not rule out foul play, even though there was no evidence of it. Someone could have been in the shadows, and they got him that way, he speculated. Interesting. So Vizecki, not only did he say that he couldn't rule out foul play, even though there was no evidence, he went further and quoted someone could have been in the shadows and they got him that way. So he went a step further and even postulated a scenario where there could have been a foul play instead of just leaving it at that. That there was no evidence of it, but he couldn't rule it out. I mean, going further, I mean, is that what he really believes then, just because he went that step further with that comment? Brandon's Law. After the searches, Annette Swanson was still struck by the initial response of the Lind police that her son had a right to be missing when she told them how old he was. I'm his mother, and I knew something was horribly wrong, she recalled later. And again, mother's intuition. A lot of people don't put stock in that, and obviously it's not 100% accurate, just like a tracking dog. People put stock in tracking dogs, but they don't have a 100% accuracy. Same thing with mother's intuition. There could be some confused signals there, but I would say in most cases, mother's intuition is pretty accurate. Not necessarily that they would know exact details of anything, just a general intuition or a general sense. She and Brian began lobbying for changes in state law that would require an investigation into the case of a missing adult to begin as soon as it is reported, much as was already required in cases of possibly abducted children. Annette met with Marty Seifert, minority leader of the state House of Reps at the time, whose district included Marshall, in a local restaurant. The two talked about the problems that she had experienced with police when she reported her son missing. She knew it wouldn't help in her son's case, but that it could help others in the future, Seifert recalled in 2015. Seifert introduced a bill called Brandon's Law that would make the required change by amending the laws governing the state's existing missing child program to change the word child to person. He recalled considerable resistance at first. I mean, at least up to the age of what, like 25-ish, or at least 21. I mean, you could, because again, I mean, college-age students, I mean, they're not exactly the most logical, responsible people. I mean, sure, some of them might be, but most of them are not, especially with all the drugs and partying in a large percentage of that college-age population. I mean, again, I could understand why they might not necessarily want to do that for like a 30-year-old or a 40-year-old. But up to 21 or even 25, I mean, that just seems common sense. He recalled considerable resistance at first from this state's law enforcement community as it was developed in committee. Part of it had to do with privacy, especially regarding cell phones, he told the Marshall Independent. Technology was emerging then, so then there were discussions about privacy and when they can ping you and when can't they. Dennis Frederickson introduced a companion bill in the state Senate. After it passed both houses, the House unanimously in May 2009, Governor Tim Pawlenty signed it into law, with the Swansons and their daughter Jameen in attendance at the ceremony. The effect of the change also required that police, in addition to determining in their preliminary investigation if the reported person is indeed missing, determine whether the person is potentially in dangerous circumstances. They must, like, broken down in a car or walking along a road. They must also notify other nearby law enforcement agencies promptly. Brandon's Law also clarifies that the agency taking the report is the lead agency investigating the case. The absence of that distinction had created some problems in the later phases of the initial search when 3 different counties were involved. Police were no longer allowed to refuse a report based on initial belief that no criminal activity was involved. The brevity of the interval since the person was last seen, the possibility that the person may have intentionally disappeared, or the lack of a relationship between the missing person and the reporter. Following the Gov's signature, the law took effect at the beginning of July 2009. 4 other states have passed similar laws. Seifert left the legislature in 2010, but he still has the pen Pawlenty used to sign the bill into law. I consider it one of the most important bills I authored in my 14 years. It will save lives. And nothing prevents common sense police officers from taking a report seriously and investigating it in the first place, even if there was no law against that. Okay. So let's get more into specific details here. So Grunge.com, of all places, has an interesting write-up here. The biggest Brandon Swanson theories, What Really Happened, by Jennifer Dushman. October 22nd, 2021 was the date of this article. On May 13, 2008, 19-year-old Brandon Swanson completed his first year at Minnesota West Community and Technical College. Later that same evening, he and his friends were celebrating at a home in Canby, where they were also having a send-off party for one of their classmates. According to witness reports, there was alcohol at the party, and Swanson had at least one shot of whiskey. However, as reported by the True Crime Files, Swanson's friends said he did not appear to be intoxicated when he left the party just after midnight, May 14th. Swanson reportedly planned to drive from Canby to his parents' home in Marshall. The drive would have taken around 30 minutes. At approximately 1:15 a.m., Swanson's vehicle got stuck in a ditch. The True Crime Files reports he initially attempted to call his friends for help. However, nobody answered his calls. At approximately 1:54 a.m., Swanson called his parents and told them his car was stuck in a ditch off a gravel road. However, he was not entirely certain of his location. During the call, Swanson assured his parents he was not hurt and that he would wait with his car. However, when Brian and Annette Swanson arrived at their son's expected location, they could not see him or his vehicle. As reported by True Crime Files, Brandon and his parents agreed to flash headlights in an attempt to find each other. Unfortunately, they still could not see each other. Brandon Swanson was on the phone with his father when he vanished without a trace. Brandon Swanson said he could see lights in the distance, which he believed were coming from the town of Lind. He told his parents he would walk the rest of the way and meet them in a parking lot of a Lind tavern. Brian said he stayed on the phone with his son while he was walking. As reported by True Crime Files, Swanson planned to take a shortcut through some fields as opposed to staying on the main road. During the call, he told his father he passed several fences and gravel roads. He could also hear water running in the distance. Brian said he and his son talked for approximately 47 minutes before Brandon exclaimed, "Oh, expletive," and the call was abruptly dropped. Brian said there was nothing after that. Brian believes his son may have slipped and fallen. Another point here, some people believe like he could have maybe been shot by somebody for trespassing and they covered it up. But apparently, how would that gunshot not be heard? You would think it would be heard unless it happened at a moment, because it said that they were dropped. The service was not excellent here. So there were dropped calls and stuff, so they had to call each other back prior to that, though. But this is a 47-minute call. I mean, some calls have dead spots. It would be curious to know if this call... I mean, everybody's been on the phone where, I mean, sometimes you have up to 5 to 10 seconds of just dead air and you can't hear the other person. So unless a gunshot or some kind of scuffle occurred at that time, it seems like his father would have heard something. The other thing I want to point out here is that, so this is a guy talking on his phone, so if there was some kind of criminal-minded individual out there looking to kill somebody, they would have heard him from a pretty decent distance if he's talking on the phone while walking. So that would bring attention to him, that otherwise just a random person walking in the middle of the night through fields might not necessarily be heard from someone from a distance if they're not talking and just walking normally. Depending, of course, on how crunchy the ground is or whatever. Either way, talking on a phone, particularly if you're in an agitated state and the connection is bad, maybe he's talking a little louder than normal, but either way, someone would be able to hear him at a certain distance that otherwise they might not. I think that's an important point to keep in mind. Brian and Annette attempted to call their son back numerous times. However, their calls were never answered. By the following morning, the calls were going directly to voicemail. The True Crime Files reports Brian and Annette continued driving around looking for their son, but they did not find any signs of him or his car. At 6:30 a.m., they called authorities to file a missing persons report. However, authorities said to wait, as it is not unusual for men his age to go missing without contacting their parents. I mean, a 19-year-old, are you going to call a 19-year-old a man? I mean, maybe a young man. I mean, a 19-year-old's a kid. Brandon Swanson's vehicle was located, but he was never found. Later that same morning, a review of Swanson's cell phone records revealed he was just outside Porter, Minnesota, while he was talking to his parents. The town he saw in the distance could not have been Lind, as he was 25 miles away from where he thought he was. True Crime Files reports he was walking along Highway 68 between Canby, where he attended the party, and Marshall, where his parents lived. Okay, I just had another thought here, too. Is it possible something traumatic happened at the party? Not necessarily that the friends were involved in disposing of him, although who knows, because how would they have found him? But if something happened, he could have been in a certain state of mind. I mean, you would think his parents would have picked up on that, but maybe not, because what state of would he normally be confused about where he was if he's from this area? I mean, I don't know. Like, obviously, if somebody's distressed or drunk, I mean, or was he really just that drunk, but he's able to cover it up in conversation? I mean, I don't know. Would a 19-year-old be able to do that? I mean, someone older, obviously, with experience doing that for many years. I mean, there are people that can do that. Would a 19-year-old kid be able to do that? I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of questions here. But if he was in some kind of state of mind, he had to have been in order to not know where he was, unless of course he's faking this as his disappearance. But if the friends were involved in helping him fake his disappearance, would they say he wasn't drunk? I mean, I don't know what to make of that either, but True Crime Files reports he was walking along Highway 68 between Canby, where he attended the party, and Marshall, where his parents lived. Authorities began their official search for Swanson shortly before noon. At approximately 12:30 p.m., his Chevrolet Lumina was found in a ditch on the borders of Lincoln and Yellow Madison, just over a mile from Taunton. Lincoln County Sheriff Jack Vizecki said the vehicle was positioned in a way that Swanson would not be able to get any traction to get out of the ditch. However, as reported by the True Crime Files, there was no visible damage to the vehicle and no signs that Swanson was injured in the incident. In the months following his disappearance, law enforcement personnel and volunteers searched the region on horseback, on foot, and using all-terrain vehicles. They also utilized search dogs and scoured several bodies of water. Unfortunately, no trace of the missing man was ever found. As reported by the True Crime Files, the search dogs led their handlers to the edge of Yellow Medicine River, which caused authorities to conclude that Swanson likely fell in the river. But I mean, the other source was saying that the dog picked up the scent again on the other side and continued elsewhere, and disappeared not in a body of water. Authorities believe Brandon Swanson fell into a river. I mean, did they really, though? As the river was searched and Brandon Swanson's body was never found, the authorities believe he made it back out of the water and continued walking. However, he likely died of hypothermia as the temperature was just 40 degrees that morning. They do not believe foul play was involved. The True Crime Files reports the search dogs also indicated that there were human remains near Mud Creek north of Porter. However, authorities never actually found any remains. So this is kind of weird. So how thorough of a search did they do? Because without knowing that, like if this was truly an absolutely thorough search, I mean, did they even use ground penetrating radar, whatever? Because if the dogs, I mean, is there more than one dog? It says here, search dogs, plural, indicated that there were human remains. So apparently only one dog picked up the track or led the track into the river and then out. But were multiple dogs hitting on remains near Mud Creek? And they searched it very well and the body wasn't there? So does that mean a body was there and it was there for a certain period of time and then moved? Is it possible he really did die of hypothermia and he fell there, and then someone just took the body and moved it for whatever reason? Either a psychopath, maybe a landowner that didn't want to be sued. I mean, I would think they would have investigated that, but who knows? So someone who wasn't responsible for his death in any way, but simply moved the body for whatever reason. Does that explain the hits with the dogs and yet the body not being there? I mean, this is curious. It's definitely curious. I mean, the temperature does match up with hypothermia, and if we believe that initial dog track, and he did fall into the river, then got out of it, walked a certain portion, because I mean, it seems like they really did do a thorough search of that river. I mean, they installed gates and all that, so yeah, it's hard to believe that they wouldn't have, unless they're all completely incompetent, but Authorities said Swanson could be anywhere within a 122 square mile area. Well, that's weird. Why not 123? 10 years after Swanson vanished, Yellow Medicine County Sheriff Bill Flated said, "It's a huge area. If you take that immediate area where the car was, and then the time frame when he was walking on the phone with his parents, who knows what direction he went and how far he traveled." Volunteer firefighter Darren E. Delzer said he has another theory about what happened to Swanson based on several things he noted about the case. In response to an article by Angelo Marcos, Delzer said Swanson was legally blind in his left eye and always wore glasses. However, on the morning he went missing, he left his glasses inside his car. I mean, this is a really important detail. It's weird how it's not even on the wiki. Delzer also noted that Swanson said, "Not another fence," right before saying, "Oh, expletive." Another interesting detail. Delzer suggested the teen may have fallen into an unmarked cistern or well, which are not uncommon in rural areas. But I mean, come on, how many of those really are there? Because if they match up with the dog track, again, if the dog track is wrong, okay, whatever. But let's assume that the dog track is accurate first. Can they really not search all of the fences and cisterns and wells just in the area of the dog track first? And if they did do that and he's not there, then expand it to other wells and cisterns in the area. I mean, how many could there really be? I mean, even if there are hundreds, I mean, it's been years. Other theories about Brandon Swanson's disappearance. Another theory suggests Brandon Swanson may have orchestrated his own disappearance. As explained by Minnesota's Unsolved Cases, it is possible that the teen left the area on his own and is now living under a new identity. However, it is not likely. As he had attempted to call his friends and was attempting to meet up with his parents, it is far more likely that he wanted to be found. It has also been suggested that Swanson may have had some kind of mental breakdown. However, his parents both said he seemed to be lucid when they spoke with him on the phone, and he did not have any history of mental illness. The theory that he fell into the water and either made it back out or drowned also has been criticized, as his phone seemed to be working after the call with his father was disconnected. Minnesota's Unsolved reports that if the phone were submerged in water, all of the calls would have gone directly to voicemail. Although it is plausible that the phone fell on the ground while Swanson fell in the water, it was never found near any of the bodies of water in the region. Although he may have sought shelter in an abandoned building, most, if not all, of the abandoned buildings in the area were searched, and neither his remains nor his personal belongings were ever found. And then they go on to talk about Brandon's Law, which we already went over. Okay, I have another theory here. I don't know if I'm going to dub this the McGuire theory. I don't know if anybody's ever thought of this, but here's my initial thought right now after reading all of this new information about the that he's blind or legally blind or partially blind in the left eye and doesn't have his glasses. If he did injure himself on a fence and fell or something, possibly enough to knock him unconscious or at least incapacitate him to the point where he couldn't grab the phone or didn't think to grab the phone. Is it possible? Now, again, I'm not saying he was attacked. I mean, that's another theory, because if he was attacked at that point, I mean, you would think there would be something heard. But here's what I'm going to dub the McGuire theory in the Brandon Swanson case. If he injured himself by falling, either in the water, I mean, yeah, the cell phone not being recovered, I mean, that's tough. But whether he fell in the water, then got out or not, or simply fell next to a fence and either hit himself on a rock or whatever, if another party, possibly a criminal-minded party, stumbled upon an injured individual, this could have been an hour later, so the phone is not on now. Or even a half an hour. I mean, they stayed on the phone for however many minutes before hanging up and trying to call again. So, and I'm assuming they continued calling throughout the night, but either way, that phone could have been taken by a criminal-minded individual who also took an injured human being. Perhaps there's a certain population of criminal-minded scumbags. Perhaps they're too cowardly to attack people under normal circumstances. Perhaps there are serial killers more of the scavenger mindset that would only act on their sinister urges on an injured party. So if they find this injured teenager, what would they do? An extension of this theory is perhaps if a good Samaritan stumbled upon him, you would think they would take the phone, call police or whatever. They wouldn't just try to help him. I mean, that's more of an outlier theory because even if they were a good Samaritan who happened to be a criminal and didn't want to have anything to do with police, or maybe some kind of tax evading cheat, a non-violent criminal, would they not contact? I mean, it still seems like they would drop him off at a hospital or something. But so it seems unlikely that they would have had him first and then another evil third party would have got him. But on the basic level of this theory, did he injure himself? And did another individual somehow do something to him after he injured himself, taking the phone with him? Because if Brandon himself was trying to crawl out of there, wouldn't the phone... It seems like the phone should have been recovered at some point through all these searches. Unless he got really, really far outside of the search area, how plausible is that? I mean, I don't know. But that's the McGuire theory I'm outlining here in the Brandon Lawson case. Perhaps he got injured, and only due to that... Or perhaps, was he being tracked? I mean, some serial killers love to operate off of roads, particularly on disabled motorists with disabled vehicles. Did they follow him from the road? So this is 2008. I'm going to drop another Echelon Spy Satellite System reference because this is 2008 and not 1970. Obviously, a lot of these spy agencies, the NSA, all these other agencies, they do have spy satellite systems. Obviously, they work with other agencies and third-party satellite companies, etc. But they clearly monitor pretty much all of the United States. 24/7 surveillance. So, wouldn't they be able to find something now? It was dark, okay, yeah, sure, but they could at least trace him from the party to a certain area, and they could at least zoom out a little bit to maybe track all the vehicles that were in the area. Because if there was another party involved, they might be able to track vehicles and at least rule them out. I'm not alleging that the satellites would be able to monitor activities, under the tree line or whatever. But in terms of vehicles and tracing movements, I mean, it would still be very, very helpful. Also, looking at some of these photos of the searches, I mean, the grass and these fields are really tall. I mean, they're almost as tall as a person. So you could see how he might not be found by a human, but with all the dogs searching, you would think they'd pick it up. And over so many years, I mean, it does seem like it's not unreasonable that they wouldn't have found him immediately, just due to the nature of the terrain. But with this many dogs employed and so many searches over the years, it seems like they should have found him by now. Unless there were private properties that didn't allow searches, I mean, I don't see a record of that anywhere. So, if there was, that'd be curious. I mean, in the Brandon Lawson case, supposedly there was a landowner possibly connected to the sheriff who did not allow his property to be searched, which is nearby, but that doesn't make sense either because supposedly they found remains with the clothes that Brandon was wearing, but there were helicopter flyovers that went over all the properties. So that doesn't make a lot of sense in the Brandon Lawson case. I talk about that on that podcast, so you can check that out if you want more information on that. And they did helicopter flyovers here as well, although that would be less helpful than a desert, because here we have these extensive fields of tall grass, so if he had fallen in the field, he wouldn't necessarily be viewable from helicopter. Other reports state that the Yellow Medicine River is between knee-deep in some areas and 15 feet deep in others. So it didn't really have a uniform depth. So 15 feet area, I mean, obviously that's super dangerous. But if it's only knee-high, if he's not drunk, it seems like he would not have drowned in that situation. Also, from some of these photos, it does look like there are some really big drop-offs in certain areas. I mean, not quite cliffs, but clearly, I mean, 10 to 20 foot drop areas where if you don't, at night and you don't see where you're going, it's just a drop. And I mean, some of it's right into the river, some of it's near the river. But again, supposedly all the areas of the river were searched, so. And especially if he was injured in some kind of fall, how far could he have gotten on his own? Does the McGuire theory come into play where a third party possibly did something to an injured Brandon Swanson? Also, another theory people bring up is that Brandon took shelter in some kind of an outbuilding of a random farmer. Now, people discount this theory because they would think that the farmer would eventually find him in their outbuilding. Now, here's a darker theory. What if some of these farmers, what if one of them had some kind of evil intentions and he did something to Brandon, in which case he would never come forward? So, how thoroughly have all of these farm owners been investigated? Again, there's nothing really to suggest they did anything, but has it been ruled out? I mean, after all these years, we do need to expand and start thinking in more than one direction. Yet another theory, if he did stumble into an outbuilding and died of hypothermia, would a farmer really come forward? Like, let's say they find him already dead. They don't want to be liable. He died on their property. I mean, in an age where burglars are suing homeowners for houses they're burglarizing and winning lawsuits, I mean, is it beyond the realm of possibility that one of these farmers, they just might have just not wanted the trouble and they disposed of the dead body? They found a dead kid in one of their buildings. What would they do? After thinking about that, actually, just now, though, I think I might have to call that the McGuire theory. That seems a little bit more plausible than some random psycho. Although, I mean, I don't know exactly how much more plausible. Obviously, we don't know what happened, so hindsight's, of course, 2020, and the body hasn't been recovered yet, and we don't know what happened to him yet. So, yeah, it's really tough, but I think I might have to call that the McGuire theory instead. That a farmer found Swanson either on their property somewhere or in one of their buildings and just didn't want the headache, and it's as simple as that. Now, on the paranormal side, just for a brief moment, if there's some kind of interdimensional rift and he fell into some kind of interdimensional wormhole and the phone was either left behind or taken with him, the only thing I could see that points to that is if there was absolutely no noise on the phone. Because when you drop a phone, I mean, there could be a rustle from the leaves nearby or whatever, or just the phone bounces a few times, animal noises, I mean, wind noises. Was it completely dead silent? And if so, I mean, was the phone broken at some point? Like, if part of the phone got damaged, that could be a non-paranormal explanation if there was no noise at all. But I don't know if the parents were ever asked if there was any kind of noises. They just said that Brandon wasn't speaking. So, and then the father said that it sounded like he tripped and fell. I don't know what that means. That was his impression, or he specifically heard some kind of a stumble. But then what was heard after that, if anything? Another theory is that he said, "Oh, expletive," because maybe he saw some headlights, so he was gonna run to a car. If he's taking a shortcut, there's a fence, and the road is a little bit of a distance away. Would he yell, "Oh, expletive," as if, "Oh, look, there's a car. I'm gonna go get help," and he rushes after the car, and then he gets hurt, falls, whatever, and he's not able to make it? Or if he did fall into the river at that point, I mean, where's the phone, though? I mean, it's rough. I mean, if they really searched well, you would think they would have searched well where the dogs were. So if the dogs really didn't have his scent, then okay, the phone might still be out there somewhere. But you would think if the dogs really did have his scent, they would have picked up the phone. Now, if Brandon lost the phone and then stumbled into some outbuilding for shelter while he was dying of hypothermia, would the farm owner who possibly disposed of him, he might actually go out and make sure that he didn't drop anything so it wouldn't be found. So if he did find the phone and confiscated it, I mean, that's my new McGuire theory right there. Because out of all the farm owners in the U.S., there's got to be at least one that would do something like that. Now, whether or not that happened in this case, again, I'm not saying that it happened. I'm just saying that's one theory that might explain why he hasn't been found or his phone might not have been found. So other people speculate that he really was drunk and that's why he was taking back roads. Also, he visited at minimum 2 parties. So he might have been more, but I believe the witnesses said he was at 2 different parties. So he's party hopping. And did he really just get confused? Or is he taking back roads to avoid a possible DUI? And that's why he even went off the road into a ditch, because he was drunk. Or maybe on some kind of drugs that wouldn't cause him to slur. if that's the case, and these roads are really poorly lit, so, I mean, definitely curious there, definitely curious. Another interesting detail I found on Reddit, supposedly, there were cadaver dogs that hit 2 to 4 miles from his last position, according to the cell phone data. And the searcher said that the dogs hit on a piece of farm equipment. And it was near one of the fields, but that particular farmer did not give them permission to do anything further. Now, the plausible deniability aspect comes in here because all of these extensive searches might ruin the crops and the farmland. Now, there is a particular time of year where it wouldn't, so it's not clear why wouldn't he give them permission on a part of year, there's at least several weeks a year where they're not actively doing crop work or whatever, that could possibly do a search without too much damage, but it's unclear whether this permission was ever given. And if the dogs really did hit on a piece of farm equipment, what does that mean? Was a piece of farm equipment used to maybe bury the body or something? I mean, that's kind of weird. And this information is about a year old. Some people speculate that the farmer simply shot him, but maybe not. I already went over that. But in the McGuire theory, perhaps he actually went up to a farm owner and talked to him. And then who knows what happened after that. Other people further speculate that perhaps the farmer might have been involved in some kind of illegal activity, drug activity, whatever, and having some kid stumble upon it. Again, nobody's saying these things are likely. I mean, these are definitely unlikely scenarios, but how do we know that this unlikely scenario isn't what happened to Brandon Swanson? That's something that the coincidence theorists really have a hard time with. Nobody's saying it's likely. I mean, we're going over outlier cases. Whatever the likelihoods, tripping and falling and dying, his body would have been found or drowning in the river. That's a likely scenario of somebody that had an accident. Those likely scenarios are the cases that are solved. So the cases that are unsolved, sometimes a certain percentage of them have unlikely outcomes. This isn't rocket science. Another possibility is if this farmer himself was a drug user, he might have thought he was being attacked by some random kid just walking through his field. So if he's high on drugs, he doesn't know what's going on. He accidentally kills him or whatever. He kills him in a drug stupor. Then the next day, he's like, wow, what have I done? He would clean up his own mess. Someone well-versed in farm equipment apparently said this: plenty of documented cases where individuals have killed and disposed of bodies on their own property. Farmers have heavy equipment too, so he's probably about 20 feet down in soil thanks to a backhoe. Gotta stay on the road, kids. And is this a backhoe that cadaver dogs hit on? The other thing too, if the McGuire theory is true and the farmer just stumbled across the body at whatever point in the morning, did they then just use the backhoe or whatever equipment to bury him deep in the field just, to avoid the mess? I mean, is that more likely than an alien abduction? Would also be curious if the farmer would allow some kind of ground-penetrating radar or a non-disruptive search, because obviously they don't want their crops ruined digging up all the fields and everything. But if they're innocent, would they object to ground-penetrating radar that wouldn't disrupt the field too much? And then, of course, brain fingerprint scanning is something I talk about as well. Obviously, polygraph test, not admissible in court, not that reliable, but brain fingerprint scanning, this is what was used on Stephen Allen Avery of Making a Murderer fame, where there was no, it basically just measures whether or not there's a familiar response in the brain. So the state's case, there was no such response in Stephen Avery's brain, so everything the state said about what happened is not recognized by Avery's brain. So he has no idea what they're talking about. So even if he did kill Teresa Hallback, it's definitely not in the manner that he was convicted of doing. That much is clear. Nobody's fooled the brain fingerprint scan technology. I think there's $100 or $150,000 reward for beating it because it bypasses any intention to deceive. It basically just measures if there's any recognition in brainwave responses to information being presented. This is what's used by the CIA and the upper government agencies in interrogations and such because it is so accurate. I think it was used in at least one court case, but then everything's kind of gone quiet on the brain fingerprint scan side of things. Is that by design? Because a lot of corrupt politicians, corrupt law enforcement, corrupt judges, they don't want it being used against them, so they just want to outlaw it outright. I don't know. But if this farmer consented to a brain fingerprint scan and consented to ground penetrating radar used on his field, then we can rule him out. But if he's opposed to all this, because obviously it's very valid that he doesn't want his crops destroyed, I mean, that's his livelihood. And he might think of it as a wild goose chase because they have no idea where this kid is. So if they come up with these scenarios that doesn't disrupt his livelihood or his fields, or if there is some kind of good Samaritan billionaire out there that wants to pay him for all the damage and then some, there's really no reason for him to decline this. Someone else also posited this, if it was some kind of farming accident. Let's say, because I don't know the schedule on the farm, someone could clarify this in May. Let's say he did fall in a field somewhere, dead or alive, maybe he's still alive, and a farmer runs him over with some farm equipment, killing him. Or if he's already dead, simply runs him over and freaks out and then just covers the whole thing up. Is that a possibility? Because we do have to rectify, these are a lot of searches being done. This isn't the 70s. This is 2008. There's a lot of advanced equipment. That people aren't complete morons, you would think. So why hasn't his body been found? Here's an interesting write-up from a Redditor. Whole bunch of hyphen and underscores with an A and a J. My thoughts, he was plowed over. From a perspective of someone who grew up in a similar rural area, farm equipment is huge with poor sight lines. It wasn't uncommon for us to get a dead deer caught in the corn head during harvest, even with a corn reel. I forgot what crops were nearby, but there is decent growth by the time he went missing to hide someone who died of exposure and is just laying there. I wouldn't want anyone trampling my fields looking for some missing young adult, as the farmer likely assumed it wasn't Dyer, and he wouldn't have noticed him in his field. When harvest came around months later, the farmer running the equipment might have not noticed the decomposed body at all, especially if the ground is rocky and uneven, so he has the corn or bean head a bit higher, and the body would be all torn up and crushed by the combine running it over. Probably enough for the farmer to not notice it's a person. When he went out again to disc the fields, or he thought it was just another deer and kept on with the same result. Or he did realize it was the kid's body at harvest time and felt so bad that he denied them the search, and that he tore him all up and that he just buried him in a hole. If any above is correct, there really isn't a body to find. He could have ended up in an abandoned well or stayed in the river too, but this idea accounts for the dogs. Drunk and lost, car is stuck, walks the wrong way, steps in the river, expletive, drops phone, can't find it or it's dead, wanders more in the dark. Cold, wet, dies of exposure in the field, no one noticed. Farmers don't want crops trampled for nothing, decomposes all summer, gets ripped up and crushed by a combine, plowed over, done. Okay, wow, that's actually very interesting. Because if the farmer really has no idea that the kid's body is on his land, he denies the search, doesn't want his field torn up, and then there's two scenarios here. Months later, he plows over the body thinking it's either a deer or whatever, doesn't give it a second thought because it's so many months later, or he does realize it's the body and covers the whole thing up. But is it plausible the farmer didn't even know that he plowed a body and it got all torn up? I mean, I don't know. Again, someone with more expertise in the equipment and how much of the clothes would have been. Although if the clothes got completely shredded, he might not have put two and two together. He might have just thought it was clothes that were abandoned and then in a separate area, a dead deer or a dead animal. So he might not even have known that he plowed over a human being. That's another interesting theory. And then in that case, he would pass a brain fingerprint scan. But again, and there would be no remains to find if it was completely shredded. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much of the bone breakdown would occur in these farm machinery. But apparently, the cadaver dogs did pick up his scent on a piece of farm machinery and the general area. They did not reveal exactly which farm this was on, but that's curious because that seems to fit all the variables here, and we don't need to invoke aliens or interdimensional rifts. And if the phone is still a curious issue, though. We do have to account for the phone location. Is it possible an animal? I don't know what kind of animals are out there. Is it possible an animal would grab a phone in its mouth and possibly carry it somewhere? So let's say it fell next to the river. Is it possible it fell next to the river and then later, as the river banks got more water, it was washed into, like, if it fell on the edge of the river, that way it didn't go dead, it continued ringing for a short time, but let's say an hour or two or 5 hours later, even 10 hours later, whatever, before the searchers looked at the spot where the phone was, regardless of where it was, is it possible the phone did get carried into the river at that point and the current took it far enough to where it was never found? Or is it possible that an animal picked it up in its mouth and carried it somewhere else and the phone is somewhere? But I mean, it's a lot harder to find a tiny little phone than it is a human being, so I don't know. But this farm equipment theory is this seems to be the leading theory at the moment from everything that I'm looking at here. I mean, the only other thing that might be a possibility, apparently the dog trail did continue to a gravel road, so is it possible someone picked him up and gave him a ride off that gravel road? So if he did go into the river, then he made it out of the river, then he made it to the gravel road and someone picked him up and took him elsewhere then. I mean, that theory and the theory of being run over by farm equipment, I mean, these seem to be the only real ones that account for all the variables here. I mean, the phone issue still. Yeah, I mean, if he got picked up I mean, I don't know. The phone, yeah, I keep getting stuck with the phone. But the phone could be explained by simply falling at the very edge of the river, and then it could have rose enough to sweep the phone in, regardless of what happened after. Alright, some final points here to round out this episode, just to make sure we cover all the bases. Supposedly, again, I haven't seen this verified, supposedly all of the car doors were unlocked and open when it was found, which is kind of weird. So, some people say, oh, well, somebody stumbled upon the car and searched the car completely and then left all the doors open. I mean, that's kind of weird in the middle of nowhere. Why would somebody have done that? I mean, was that just an opportune thief who doesn't even know who Brandon Swanson is, and they just searched the car looking for valuables? I mean, was anything reported stolen from it, or if there was nothing to steal from it? I mean, that's just kind of weird. And then also, Brandon Swanson's case is on the FBI's VICAP. And again, they usually don't put cases on there unless there is foul play suspected or some kind of crime, as opposed to just missing with zero evidence of a crime. So who knows? I mean, who knows why it's on there? So, I mean, FBI VICAP itself stands for Violent Criminal Apprehension Program. And, of course, Maura Murray's case was famously just added several months ago, randomly out of nowhere. So, is this related to the farm equipment theory, where there was a violent criminal, the farmer, even if it was an unknowing violent act? I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense unless they have more information. So, the final theory I'm going to go over here, there's really there's no evidence for it or anything. Is it possible that Brandon Swanson was followed from one of the parties he was at? Not even necessarily by a party goer, but let's say, see, people say, oh, it's unlikely that Swanson just stumbled upon some kind of serial killer. Now, or a violent criminal in the middle of nowhere in the fields. Well, here's the thing. If there's a lot of parties going on, the semester's ending, there's a lot of parties going on, would a violent criminal and or serial killer stalk certain parties where there's a lot of people maybe looking for someone to kind of get alone, because that's certainly much more plausible than a violent serial killer just randomly wandering around the fields and bumping into Swanson. Because if there was someone following him at a pretty good distance, I mean, who knows how experienced this criminal may have been, did they stumble upon his car first and then went looking for him and found him and then something happened? Again, I think all of these avenues do need to be explored. Not necessarily that this was one of his friends or someone who knew him. Again, males are much more likely to be met with foul play at the hands of a stranger than females. But maybe it wasn't a stranger either. I mean, did they truly rule out every single individual at every single party? I don't know how thorough they did that investigation, but it didn't even necessarily have to be someone at the parties. It could have been possibly some older guy just kind of hanging around at a distance, just monitoring certain parties, and he happened to follow Swanson. Again, I am not alleging that this is true or untrue. This is MINDSHOCK, where the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. I actually found one more post that's very relevant by Scriptor. I'm new to the case, but after reading, this is what I think happened. Given the missing 2 hours in the timeline and the drinking at the parties, I believe he was heavily intoxicated. He probably felt fine when he departed, but a short time later he got on the road and he fell asleep while driving and slowly came to rest at the top of the hill. This would explain the lack of damage to the car, the reason why there is a 2-hour gap between the time he left the party and the time he called his parents, and his confusion on his location. Given the 2-hour nap, he may have been successfully able to hide the fact that he was inebriated, he was underage, and may not want to admit that to his parents. His state would also explain why he would leave the gravel road. The light is believed for him to see was a singular light, not light pointing toward a small town. This alone proves he was confused and not of his faculties. From there, I believe the O expletive came from him slipping in the water. His phone was lost to the river and he continued on the other side. His scent was tracked to another road. I sadly believe he continued on and eventually died to his exposure. An open space at night can be extremely disorienting, even more if you are inebriated. I wish the family could get some closure. Of course, this person does not account for the body not being found, but in terms of the 2-hour gap, I don't know if we went over that. So apparently there's 2 hours missing from when he left the party to when he called the parents. Interesting. So where was he that whole time? Was it really just a nap? A drunk nap? Other people stated that the reason why nothing was heard on the other end of the phone, if he accidentally hit mute on the phone, or if he's bumping into a fence and he drops the phone and the phone is on the other side of the fence and he can't find it after that, so he just continues on. I mean, I don't know. But this 2-hour gap is curious. Another thing I found on the Brandon Swanson subreddit, supposedly users here have stated that there was extensive searching with metal detectors. So the phone was never found. So they specifically looked for the phone as well as Brandon. So that's something that's very, very curious. Very, very curious indeed. So that's it for now. All the MINDSHOCK listeners out there, leave your own thoughts and theories on this very baffling case. What you believe happened, why or why not, and what the evidence tells us, what the cell phone issues tell us. If you enjoy the MINDSHOCK podcast, want to help support the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Like and share the podcast, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. You could also be a guest in the podcast depending on your tier. You could also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube for access to exclusive streams and chats. And make sure you subscribe to the channel to get the latest updates on cases. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.
If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to MINDSHOCK True Crime. This is your host, Bruce McGuire, and you are listening to the Brandon Swanson series. This is episode 2 and one of the strangest, most bizarre disappearances in recent history. That of Brandon Swanson, who was actually on the phone with his parents at the time he disappeared. And if you haven't checked out episode 1, make sure you check that out because we went over a lot of information. But there are still more theories and still more mind-shocking information available that we will be going over now. In typical Mindshock fashion, with logic and reason at the forefront. As always, if you want to help support the Mindshock podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Help us get more mind-shocking content out there, keeping up awareness, not just in this case, but in other missing persons cases, cold cases, and wrongful convictions. You could also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube for exclusive streams and chats. Make sure you subscribe to the channel for the latest on MindShock. Like and share the podcast, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get a priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcast requests. You could also be a guest in the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. Okay. So on one of the recent podcasts on Brandon Swanson, a very astute MindShock listener, Tom N, left a couple super chats in the chat that I actually didn't see at the time. I don't always catch them in the chat, but I will go over them on follow-up episodes, so rest assured, all comments and theories and super chats will be gone over in follow-up episodes, which we're doing right now, so we're actually going to start with that. And Tom N posted this. I think he was hit by a car. I think the car that hit him is owned by the same guy that graded the road where the dogs tracked his scent to. I can't see him leaving the roadway. Whoa! So that's a major mind shock there. The guy that graded the road where the dogs tracked his scent to. So, yeah, I mean, getting hit by a car, that is one of the theories. However, upon first glance, it would seem unlikely given where the phone call cut out. However, if Brandon did fall into the river and then he climbed out the other side and made it to the edge of a road, as the dog track shows. Now, I think I mentioned this in the previous episode as well. I mean, how many dogs tracked him there? Because if the dogs were confused by the scent, because if he actually fell into the river, again, expert dog handlers and dog scent trackers, they can answer these questions. How reliable is a scent if you're tracking somebody through water, through rivers, etc.? Would dogs get confused at that point? Because obviously the scent is not going to be as good once you're all wet. And especially however long time has passed since the individual was in that area. So another comment here from Tom N. Would he leave the roadway in the middle of the night in an area he wasn't familiar with? I think he was accidentally hit by a car and buried by a farmer. I was raised on a farm. This time of year there is no crops mature enough to make a body non-visible. Maybe a road grader had his scent on it. So, and even further posts here from Dave. Dave states, interesting how the farmer wouldn't give them permission to search his land extensively. And again, we kind of went over that. That's not that suspicious, but if the farmer was responsible, obviously he wouldn't want them to search. And apparently several different farmers also denied searches farther from the area. So not obviously, if you're going with the communal slang theory that I don't think we even went over in the past podcast, even though this is MindShock, where the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. But unless these farmers were having some kind of occult ritual and they're all involved in a conspiracy of silence, it would seem that all of the farmers can't be responsible. It would have just been one. So all the other farmers that also denied searches of their property, etc., if they're innocent, they also denied them. So again, it's not necessarily indicative of guilt. So Tom N continues here. Accident by a drunk driving farmer or the farmer's kid. Coming over a hill, the kid calls daddy and daddy makes it all go away. The road they tracked him to was freshly graded. Okay, so that is very, very curious. I mean, this is quite a mind-shocking theory. So if this was a farmer or a farmer covering for his son or other family member or a friend, I mean, some people allege there is drug activity here. So if they're let's say involved in some kind of illicit or criminal activity, they're going to help each other out in cases such as this, possibly. So is this somebody covering for somebody else or simply for themselves, possibly drunk drive? If they're driving drunk and they hit somebody, I mean, what are they going to do? They're clearly liable, drunk or not, but if they're drunk, I mean, that's a massive liability. Would they really call the police? I mean, obviously a certain percentage of people might, but a certain percentage of people would not necessarily call the police if there was a drunk driving accident where they actually hit a human being and possibly killed them. So was this a cover-up? So, as of right now in episode 1, the McGuire theory in this case was that a farmer, possibly unbeknownst to themselves, possibly plowed over him. Now, this guy's saying that Tom N states that he was raised on a farm and there's no crops mature enough to make a body non-visible, but there was really, really tall grass. Now, again, I am not a farmer, so I don't know the exact state of fields, but in these photos where they're searching for him, I mean, there's clearly areas where the grass is super high. Now, I guess somebody wouldn't necessarily be riding farm equipment there. Again, unless we're going to say, I mean, how often do people engage in various utilizing farm equipment in some kind of drunk antics where they might have not even been aware? I mean, I don't know. For the people that do live in farm areas, how often do people get drunk and get on farm equipment and ride the equipment where they wouldn't necessarily ride it over crops, etc.? So, again, a lot of different theories here, but Tom N's theory here is perfectly viable. I mean, it's a perfectly viable theory, quite mind-shocking as well. Yet another commenter, Mark, actually commented he made this comment on a MindShock video on Brandon Swanson as well. This is the oddest case I have ever seen. Very bizarre. Only logical explanations: the trespass theory was my first thought, or the water, or he was hit by a car and taken away. If he had died of hypothermia, they would have found his remains. Another theory I read way back: he climbed a tree to look for lights and passed away from hypothermia while high up in the tree branches. So, wow, this is a theory I had not considered. A pretty interesting theory, because for search and rescue, again, I mean, we would, if you're doing helicopter flyovers, etc., if the canopy and leaves, if they were to provide enough of a cover, you wouldn't necessarily see the body from flyovers. Now, from searchers on the ground, depending on how exactly and where exactly he climbed into which tree, it's possible he might have not been visible. And if that's the case, because did they really climb up every single tree? I mean, obviously you could see a certain portion of the tree from the ground, but were they specifically looking high up trees in the branches? I would think no. I mean, is that standard search and rescue procedure, to specifically climb up all these trees and search them? I don't think it is, in which case that seems to possibly be plausible. Now, you would think that maybe some of the remains would have fallen from the tree at some point. Again, it depends on how if he was kind of wedged in, maybe a large tree. I mean, again, we really don't know. And then, even if the remains did fall at some point on a farmer's property, if a particular farmer just didn't want the noise, would they have just covered up at that point? Like, same thing as we went over in episode 1. If they found him in an outbuilding or whatever, he was already dead, there's nothing that can be done. They just didn't want to deal with authorities. Either they could possibly be involved in drugs or something else, or they just, for whatever reason, that's the way they chose to handle the situation, was to just cover up the remains, etc., even if they were not guilty of actually killing him in any way. So, let's go to Unresolved Mysteries subreddit. Interesting info on Brandon Swanson and my theory. This was posted by Beth Ramon 5 years ago. Hello everybody, my name is Bethany. This is actually my first post. I've been a lurker for several years, pretty adamant about staying that way, but I've discovered some little known details about this case, and I simply can't keep them to myself. I know there have been at least a few threads on Brandon, as well as a sub, but the sub isn't very active and there hasn't been a post on him for a couple months. Just to summarize, for people who aren't familiar with the case, Brandon Swanson was a 19-year-old from Marshall, Minnesota, where he disappeared in May 2008. He was returning from a party when he crashed his car in a ditch and called his parents for help. He wasn't injured in the crash, or supposedly not. I don't know how they would know that. Brandon was in a densely wooded and remote area while he stayed on the phone with his parents for at least an hour when he suddenly exclaimed, "Oh, expletive," and that was the last anyone heard from him. Not a trace of Brandon has ever been found, and his car was found 25 miles from where he said he was, which is interesting since Brandon was familiar with the area. The general consensus seems to be that following the fateful O expletive, Brandon's phone immediately hung up and his parents tried to call him back several times. But upon watching the Nancy Grace segment where his mother is interviewed, of which only 3 minutes seem to exist, does anyone know where I can find the full version? Brandon's mother explicitly states otherwise. I read through the comments and nobody else seems to catch it, but here's the exact quote. Interviewer, did you try to call him after that? Annette Swanson states, oh yes we did. We didn't immediately hang up the phone. We called his name, we tried to, thinking he still had the phone and that it was very near him and that he could pick it up or that he could hear our voice. And we called out to him several times, we realized he's not there. End quote. And I went over this episode 1 as well, so if he had dropped the phone in the water and it just ceased to work, the connection should have terminated, not still been there to where they were calling out his name and he was simply not there. Or if he fell into the river, but the phone fell on the riverbank and not in the river, therefore the phone was still functional, but now he was farther away from it. Continuing on with the post here, of course this info can't prove any theories, but I think it certainly has the potential to rule some out. If the call was still active, but there was simply silence after the O expletive, then his parents surely would have heard something if he had fallen in the river or had been attacked by an animal. Apparently his father only heard, quote, what sounded like his foot slipping, end quote. But could you really identify sounds that specific with a 2008 Motorola SLVR? I mean, it kind of depends. If it was complete silence and the slip was really loud, like a shoe on rock or something, maybe. This info seems to support my theory of foul play. I think he saw someone that he knew and was afraid of, dropped the phone, and ran. On YouTube and Reddit, I've seen a few comments left by people from the area who claim they've heard rumors about Brandon owing a drug debt and being found and killed by dealers. Now, let me just interject here. Isn't there a theory about that in almost every single case ever? Now, given young people, college-age people, a lot of them are involved in drugs, usually innocuous drugs like marijuana and the sort, or even if other drugs, usually it doesn't end in any kind of murder or anything crazy like this. It's simple acquaintances or acquaintances of an acquaintance and just knowing dealers. And so it's not that outlandish to think that an average college person might possibly know some drug users or drug dealers. But in terms of an actual debt and having some kind of warrant or bounty out on them or some kind of point to be made by killing them over a drug debt, that does seem to be a theory in almost every single missing persons case. So, again, how much are we going to read into that? Again, let's not dismiss it. I'm not stating anything is true or untrue. This is, of course, MINDSHOCK, where the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. But, again, I just wouldn't automatically jump to that theory being true simply because it exists locally, because that seems to be the case in a lot of cases. One person said that he was left in a field and ground up with cattle feed. Okay, so these are supposed locals here. Wow. One person said he was left in a field and ground up with cattle feed. The other said that they heard he is buried in one of the Dakotas. Obviously, this one is much more likely. Of course, you have to take comments like that with a grain of salt, but it makes quite a bit of sense. Here are some reasons why. Brandon is featured on the FBI's VICAP database. That is interesting. Maura Murray was, of course, added to that as well. And VICAP, for those that don't know, is the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program. Keyword there, violent. And criminal. I mean, because these are not missing persons cases where people just run away. They're being added to the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program. What states here on the FBI's site here, the VICAP write-up, Brandon was last seen May 14, 2008, leaving a friend's house. His car was found abandoned in a ditch with the car doors open and the keys missing. So, what information does the FBI have, possibly unreleased, that's leading them to list him on VICAP? Curious. So, continuing on with the post here, Brandon is featured on the FBI's VICAP database, along with, as of last year, only around 50 or so people. This is interesting because apparently the majority, if not all cases featured on there, are speculated to be victims of crime. Because obviously there's a lot more than 50 missing people. But on VICAP, these are the ones specifically thought to be victims of violent crime. That is indeed curious. They talk about it quite a bit on the last 2 pages of the lengthy Web Sleuths thread. Perhaps the FBI knows more than they are or are legally allowed to let onto. So let's go to Web Sleuths here and go through some interesting posts here before we get back to that Reddit. But a post here by Mesquite. I've really been thinking about it for the past few days. It's posted in 2019, and this just reeks of Israel Keys, honestly. Huh. You know what's weird? Would Israel Keys make a point of stealing his victims' keys? Car keys or house keys? If you haven't checked out the Israel Keys episode on MINDSHOCK, make sure you check that out. The most comprehensive and exhaustive podcast on Israel Keys, his crimes, his suspected crimes, and all of the variables relating to Israel Keys, one bizarre and vile individual. Continuing on here with this Web Sleuths post, the accident theory doesn't make sense to me. One of the most glaring being, why were his glasses in the car? I know people can do strange things when stressed, but he was lucid enough to make sense to his parents on the phone. If he thought he was walking towards town in which he would need to look out for his parents, there's no rationalizing leaving his glasses behind. Even less so to initially bring them and then go back and drop them off in the car. Excellent point there. That is an excellent point. Further points. Further on the glasses, many people suspect the disappearance of Jimmy Tidwell in Texas, February 2012, is linked to Keys, and his glasses were also found in his abandoned car. 2. The FBI released a public timeline of Keys' travels from 98 to 2012. However, it's heavily redacted. They have a private internal one that's more detailed. The public one mentions Minnesota only once, October 2008. When he flew into Minneapolis from Seattle and then made his way to Grand Forks, North Dakota. Interesting, though, in her book American Predator, Maureen Callahan claims the FBI noted several states that were frequent destinations for Keys, and yep, Minnesota is on that list. But the public timeline has him in the state only once, presumably just as a connection. Something is obviously amiss. Yeah, I mean, supposedly the FBI knows quite a bit more than has been released regarding Israel Keys. And, that's definitely a curiosity. 2, as a related side note, one of Keys' army buddies was a die-hard Vikings fan, and that's how Keys developed an interest in football. He subsequently also became a big Vikings fan. 4, he admitted preferring small towns since he believed law enforcement would be a lot less experienced investigating abductions and homicides. 5, he also admitted that one of his victims' bodies was found and ruled an accident. He hinted at more accidental death rulings for his victims. In his interviews, it's pretty obvious that he loved making his victims appear to have suffered their demise due to an unfortunate accident. 6, hiding in the woods and staking people out was something he mentioned doing as far back as a teenager. 7, he admitted fantasy and plans including taking a victim from back roads. 8, investigators have said that scent dogs indicated a hit near an abandoned farm, and we know in at least one instance Keys took his victims to an abandoned farmhouse, the Courier couple in Vermont. 9, supposedly Keys' only victim preference was lightweight, since it was just easier. Brandon was rather petite, 5'5", 120 pounds, according to his missing persons flyer. Especially considered Keyes was a pretty big dude at 6'3" or maybe even 6'4". I know I could just be trying to make the pieces fit, and I won't completely rule out the possibility of an accident, but I don't know. When all of these circumstantial clues are taken together, I get a really, really bad feeling. And it doesn't necessarily have to be Israel Keyes. I mean, there's a lot of scumbags out there that like killing people. And also, if this was drug-related, then, again, most victims who are met with foul play are met with foul play at the hands of someone they know. Now, if you're a female, those are astronomical. A male is more likely than a female to be met with foul play at the hands of a stranger. So we do have to keep that in mind as well. Follow-up post. It's super interesting, too, that Brandon disappeared directly in the middle of a period in which Keyes was traveling. You know what's weird, too? Regarding the FBI VICAP, if they do suspect something in connection with Keyes specifically, is that why they listed Brandon Swanson? Even if they couldn't prove it? Was it something that Keyes said in interviews or some information they have that has not been publicly released? I wish it was more clear what the timeline means by Western U.S. If he was in California or something, I think the timing would be too tight, but if he was in Wyoming, he absolutely could have gotten there and back. Another good point. Another post here. For everyone who believes in an accident theory, but what to make of his glasses being in the car then? And any other aspect, body never being found, etc., I could understand, but the glasses don't make sense. Has it been confirmed that he was wearing them at the party that night? Did he have more than one pair? Did he have contacts? All great questions here. DNP2B posted this. I have a few questions. 1. I read the dogs hit on the body of water but then jumped out and continued down the road. Is it possible that he wandered around before falling into the water as his final destination? I mean, of course, logically, someone could walk in a mostly semi-straight line path, but under the circumstances, it's possible he wandered around and the dog trailed his scent, however, not in the exact path he took. It was very dark and I'm sure scary at night being all alone and lost. Not to mention, he may have had issues being his glasses were found in the car, and if he did not have any others or contacts. That's a great point as well. If he's wandering in circles, how would that affect the dog track? Or not even necessarily a circle, but like maybe an S-path, back and forth, zigzag, back and forth, not knowing where he was. Yeah, I mean, there's no... Obviously, we weren't there. We have no guarantee that he didn't go back and forth and get turned around multiple times, in which case that would confuse even the best of dogs. 2, his dad reported at the end of the call hearing something like a foot slipping. Isn't it possible he heard a scuffle from someone else who surprised Brandon? I have seen several opinions on here regarding Brandon's last statement. Personally, I would say that if someone scared me or surprised me, if I slipped or walked into something, another choice word would come out. Not knowing Brandon, I cannot judge what kind of event would elicit what he said. I also feel that if one slipped or had an accident, the words would come after the accident. Or groaning or something. Yeah, that's a good point. I could be wrong, but from my experience, most people do not have time to process what is happening and utter a sentence during an accident where the body is in motion. Now, being surprised by a person coming at you, it takes a moment to see the person and interpret what is happening. Your eyes see it, and the signal is sent to your brain to interpret it. The other person slows the process down a little as well because of their movements. Unlike if you were to fall, it's more instantaneous. 3, does anyone know why he is listed under VICAP or the reasoning? I saw that another poster was going to ask her friend, but unfortunately I didn't see a follow-up on this. I also believe, as many others have said, many details of the case have been kept from the general public. The FBI website does indeed say his car doors were open and the keys missing. I almost wonder if he didn't take the keys with him, but maybe he did not lock the doors on the vehicle. Someone else came along and scoured through the car looking for something of value to take. This could have been someone who harmed him, or even someone who came across his car and never even saw Brandon. I hope they find him soon. Mostly I think he is not within the area they have searched. I think they need to broaden the search, but there's also the possibility he isn't anywhere near the area. If he was mixed up directionally, he could have very well walked in the opposite direction even further. Okay, that's a good post too. I think we went over that, where if someone came across the car possibly looking for loot, yes, it's possible they were not involved in the crime at all, but they didn't want to come forward, obviously, admitting that they were looking to steal. A follow-up post here, something else I'm curious about. 1, is there any transcript of the phone call between him and his father? 2, exactly how far was his car found from the last place he left from to head home? I've read it takes 30 to 45 minutes from the last party to his home. He was on gravel roads, so give or take a few minutes. One would more than likely know if he had been driving for 10 minutes as opposed to 40. And we actually went over that. There was a time gap, so some people believe Brendan might have took a nap or whatever. Then he asked, about the dogs, and then also, was the seat of the car adjusted appropriately for Brandon? That's a good detail right there. I don't know if we mentioned that last episode. That's a good detail. On another site, there's an interesting comment regarding him being murdered for a drug debt. I take all comments with a grain of salt, but I'm curious as to what locals believe happened or what rumors have circulated. I also want to say I imagine how easy it could be to miss remains. After so long, I imagine they probably aren't even above the surface entirely, which would make them very hard to notice. I do find it curious that no clothing or the cell phone has been located if he were in the area. What if he wasn't near the area where they found his car? What if the car was moved? That's actually another interesting point. I don't know if we discussed that. Was the car moved, staged, etc.? It's possible they are searching the wrong area due to someone moving the car, either purposely or not. This is a good poster here. These are very, very good points. A post by Arnie here. I don't know if this is Arnold Schwarzenegger or not, but this is Arnie. I have followed this case on and off throughout the years and have one outstanding question. If anyone here knows the answer, it is much appreciated. I have never had a lot of confidence in tracking dogs per se. But in this case, I understand at least 5 different professional dogs all tracked scent to the river where the scent ended. But then the dogs picked it up again in a different spot along the riverbank and followed it toward a drainage ditch and a gravel road where the scent ended again. My question is this: was the continuing scent on the opposite bank of the river or just farther down on the same side? So we actually went over the visuals here on episode 1. I have other questions too, like, is it known from which direction he was originally going if he went back and forth across the river? Like, how is all this known? Are these just guesses? Because I'm not disputing the dog scent. I'm just saying, how do they know the timeline of that if he got turned around and went back and forth even multiple times? But they also posted a Jeff Hayes missing person case study here on wikiversity.org. This is quite a detailed write-up. So again, you are listening to MINDSHOCK. We are comprehensive. We're going to go down all of the specifics here. Tuesday, May 13th, 2008. Brandon started his evening at a house in Lind, Minnesota, rented by several friends. He had just finished a year-long technical school program in wind energy. It was the night before graduation, and he was at a small gathering of 5 people described as a get-together of a few friends. He consumed an unknown amount of alcohol. One witness stated that the gathering was low-key, and Brandon was not overly intoxicated. Between 10:30 and 11 p.m., he left the gathering alone and drove to another friend's house in Canby to say goodbye to a classmate. It was reported that he had an additional shot of whiskey at this party. He was there only for a short time and left sometime after midnight for his home in Marshall. Wednesday, May 14, 2008. The 2-lane Highway 68 is a direct route southeast from Canby to Marshall. Brandon had driven it many times. Yet, he doesn't appear to have taken Highway 68 to get home. See, whenever something is out of the ordinary, that's where the attention needs to go, because in most cases where something happens, the out of the ordinary variables are somehow related to it. So is it possible there was another location? Is he going to score drugs? Is he being threatened? Is there another friend or another party that was not reported for illegal dealings, and someone there might have had something to do with what happened to him? Either way, continuing on here, it appears that he was driving on gravel roads northeast of the highway to get home. We believe he was on the gravel roads to avoid detection by law enforcement and a DUI charge. These gravel roads do not parallel the highway. They are at about a 45-degree angle to the highway, running east-west and north-south. He would have had to take multiple turns in a stair-step fashion to follow the highway's relative path. We know that he eventually ended up driving west down a minimal maintenance road for a mile. Do we really know that? Do we know that he was alone? This is actually a field road between two large crops. He was attempting to turn south back onto the gravel road when he missed his field approach and went into the ditch at low speeds. The ditch bank was shallow but steep there, and the frame of the car became hung up, so he was not able to back out or go forward. This occurred at approximately 1:15 a.m. There was no damage to the car and no evidence of injury inside the vehicle. Brandon attempted to contact 2 or 3 of his friends by cell phone, but was unable to reach them. So he called his parents for assistance at 1:54 a.m. Interesting. So allegedly, they're stating here that the car went into the ditch at approximately 1:15 a.m. And I'm not sure how they would know that. So 1:15 a.m. and then 1:54 a.m. So how many friends does he call? Only 2 or 3 friends. So even if he calls them repeatedly, 5 minutes at a time, 10 minutes at a time, I mean, it's not until 1:54 a.m. that he calls his parents. He says he's in a ditch between Marshall and Lind and directs his parents there. There were several calls placed between Brandon and his parents, 1:54 and 2:17 a.m. During one call, he states he's on the left side of the road, just off Highway 23, suggesting from the position his car was found that he was oriented towards the south and was confusing 68 for 23. During this time, Brandon's parents searched for him by car but were unable to find him. There has been considerable speculation as to why Brandon was so disoriented as to his location. We believe that it is relatively easy to explain. His disorientation was likely due to a combination of 5 factors. 1, fatigue. 2, at least mild intoxication. Remember, his blood alcohol was still rising after he left Canby from that shot of whiskey. 3, unfamiliar roads. While he had driven Highway 68 many times, he probably had little reason to drive the gravel roads. 4, the fact that all the intersections look relatively alike, mostly tilled fields with very few landmarks. And 5, possibly simple distraction. These all could have contributed to him not knowing exactly where he was. Also, I think we went over this before too. Is it possible someone spiked one of his drinks and even followed him from the party? How he came to the conclusion that he was near Lind is a little bit more difficult to explain. While we will never know for sure, we believe that when he realized he had traveled down a minimum maintenance road, he conducted what is known as a transderivational search. He searched his memory for other minimal maintenance roads that he knew and came up with the gravel road which lies along a golf course between Marshall and Lind, with which he was apparently familiar. At 2:17 a.m., Brandon's mother calls him. Brandon is clearly becoming impatient and tells her that he's going to walk to Lind. He directs his parents to meet him at the Lindwood Tavern in Lind. That's an original name there. At 2:23 a.m., Brandon and his father begin a 47-minute cell phone call. During this call, Brandon indicates that he was walking along a gravel road away from Marshall towards Lind. At some point, he leaves the road and travels cross-country, stating that he is going to, quote, cut across because it will be quicker than following the road, end quote. He further stated that he had encountered 2 fence lines and noted that there was water nearby. Shortly after, Brandon exclaims, "Oh, expletive." His father believes he hears Brandon's foot slipping and the phone goes dead. And apparently it did not go dead. This is not a 100% accurate response right up here. This was at 3:10 a.m. No further contact was made even after repeated attempts. Weather in the early morning hours of May 14th was mostly clear with a light wind for the area of 6 to 9 miles per hour. The temperature at the time of disappearance was 46 degrees Fahrenheit and dropped to a low of 39 degrees Fahrenheit. The moon was at its third quarter due west of Brandon's position and setting at the time the phone went dead. Brandon's parents continued to look for him throughout the night. At 6:30 a.m., they contacted the Lyon County Sheriff's Office and reported him missing. The reflex tasking phase of the search. Wednesday, May 14th, 2008. We do not have any direct documentation regarding the early hours of the search. The following is based on reports from Brandon's family and media reports. We can presume that after taking the initial information, an ATL, attempt to locate, was issued for Brandon and his car. It is our understanding that the Sheriff's Office put in a request to Brandon's cell carrier for data. We also understand that no information was immediately available because no one was at the carrier's offices yet that morning. Shortly after the office opened, they found that Brandon's cell had been connected to the cell tower just south of Minnesota. I presume that they immediately refocused their search efforts in that area. At approximately 12:30 p.m., a Lyon County Sheriff deputy found Brandon's car located 1.5 miles north of Minnesota Highway 68 on the border of Lyon and Lincoln counties. The UTM coordinate of the vehicle's location is 14T 730-613-ME 4945208MN WGS 84. Regarding information that can be gleaned from a cell phone call after the fact. While this is somewhat beyond my expertise, this is what I understand. Contrary to popular belief, cell phone carriers do not constantly keep track of the GPS location of every phone in the system. Big Brother isn't really watching. Or is he? Only what tower each phone is connected to. This is for several reasons. Not all phones are GPS capable. While phone systems can roughly triangulate a cell's origin, this requires the phone to be picked up by multiple towers, and many calls are only carried by one tower. And keeping records of this data would require massive data storage capacity, which increases cost to the carriers. In order for law enforcement agency to track the phone has to be queried by the carrier. This requires some paperwork and approvals. We don't know if this was attempted in this case, but it likely would not have been any help since by this time the phone was most probably already inoperable. In the various missing person websites, many inferences have been made regarding the fact that Brandon's cell phone rang for a time before it went straight to voicemail. Unfortunately, little can be inferred from this. According to one of our team members who is an executive at a regional telephone company, the ring that you hear when you call someone has little to do with what is happening at the other end, the recipient's phone. It is an artificial sound that is being generated at a switch in some building, not by the recipient's phone. It is a holdover from the old analog phone days. Although I do have to interject here, I've tested this with multiple phones and other people in the room, not necessarily on purpose, but when somebody's phone dies, it usually goes straight to voicemail. It doesn't ring, so just make of that what you will. The way a phone handles voicemail when it is turned off or disabled is entirely dependent on how this function is programmed at the phone carrier's computer systems. Therefore, there is a great deal of variability regarding how it works between carriers, calling plans, and even models of phones. So here's the thing, though. They know which carrier he had, and if he was on the same plan as his parents with the same carrier, they know the models of phones, so they would be able to have that information. While there are many possibilities regarding what happened at the end of Brandon's phone call to his father, the phone may have been lost, shorted out in the water, battery dead, working but Brandon wasn't able to use it, etc. Although if we do have the piece of information that the phone did not go dead. So apparently his parents did say that it remained connected for some time while they were yelling his name. So presumably it wouldn't have broken on impact with the ground or in the water. So if it was dropped and still on for a certain period of time, that's the presumption there. The only thing that can be accurately inferred is that Brandon wasn't able to reestablish contact with his father after that point. Some more information regarding cell phone tower networks. The paradigm is the assumption that when you make a call on your cell phone, it automatically routes to the nearest cell tower, and that by capturing those records, police can determine where you made a call, and thus where you were at a particular time. That is not how the system works. When you hit send on your cell phone, a complicated series of events takes place that is governed by algorithms and proprietary software, not just by the location of the cell tower. First, your cell phone sends out a radio frequency signal to the tower within a radius of up to roughly 20 miles, or fewer in urban areas, depending on the topography and atmospheric conditions. A regional switching center detects the signal and determines whether to accept the call. There are hundreds of such regional centers across the country. The switching center determines the destination of your call and connects to the landlines which will take it to cell towers near the destination. Almost instantaneously, the software decides which half of a half a dozen towers in your area you'll connect with. The selection is determined by load management software that incorporates dozens of factors, including signal strength, atmospheric conditions, and maintenance schedules. The system is so fluid that you could sit at your desk, make 5 consecutive cell phone calls, and connect to 5 different towers. During a conversation, your signal could be switched from one tower to the next. You'll also be handed off to another tower if you travel outside your coverage area while you're speaking. Designed for business and not tracking, call detail records provide the kind of information that helps cell companies manage their networks, not track phones. We, the civilian search and rescue resources involved in the case, know little about the first day's search efforts. Our media account mentioned that besides using local officers for the initial search efforts, they requested the help of a canine from nearby Chippewa County. I don't know what his dog found. However, I suspect that this dog is a police canine and attempted to run a non-scent specific track, as opposed to a scent specific trailing dog. This would have been at least 10 hours after the cell phone contact was lost, which is a stretch for a tracking dog, which generally follows fear scent and the track made by crushed vegetation. We also know that the car was towed away the first day of the search. In an unfortunate coincidence, the roads were graded the morning of the 14th, destroying any footprints. What a coincidence indeed. Thursday, May 15, 2008. By 11 a.m., members of the Codington County Search, Dive, and Rescue Team arrived at the request of the Lyon County Sheriff. This was a very good call. While initial attempts at obtaining a direction of travel using trailing dogs failed, once they switched to another scent article, one of the dogs was able to pick up a trail. From Brandon's vehicle, it traveled a half-mile south and then turned west onto 390th Street, where it continued for a mile. There, the trail turned north onto County Road 16. The trail continued north for half a mile, then turned west on the driveway of an abandoned farm. It continued west for approximately a quarter of a mile, then left the driveway and roughly followed the course of the Yellow Medicine River heading northwest. At one point, the bloodhound jumped onto the Yellow Medicine River and then exited. The handler interpreted this behavior as possibly indicating that Brandon might have fallen into the river at that point. However, the trail continued past this point to a drainage, where it continued north toward the gravel road, forming the boundary between Lincoln and Yellow Medicine counties. The dog was unable to trail further. The trail is consistent with Brandon's 47-minute cell phone conversation with his father. We know he traveled along gravel roads for most of the conversation. He then left the road and traveled cross-country at the driveway. He mentioned 2 fence lines which are in the area. The terrain near the river is wooded, uneven, and has many animal den holes. In addition, Brandon was congenitally blind in his left eye, making his depth perception poor, especially in the dark. And the moon was setting during the conversation, leaving him with only starlight to navigate by. Finally, the average person walks between 1 and 3 miles an hour. That puts Brandon between 3/4 mile and 2.5 miles away from his car when the phone went dead. The trail to the point in the river where the dog jumped in is within that range. We believe that it is most likely that Brandon tripped, stumbled, or slipped on one of the many hazards in the area. He likely dropped his phone and it was rendered inoperable somehow. Shorted out in the water, hit something hard and broke, battery popped out, or he simply couldn't find it again. Again, relating to the more recent information about the phone continuing to be on, basically it was on, so he might have not been able to find it, or he ran from there because there was some kind of dangerous situation. In addition to the bloodhounds, 2 area search dogs worked the area near the car and around the Yellow Medicine River. There were also an unknown number of emergent volunteers searching the area around the vehicle and a team from the Department of Natural Resources that floated the river in a boat. Based on the bloodhound trail, a presumption was made that Brandon fell into the water and drowned. Much of the search efforts from this point on is directed toward this scenario. While this was a reasonable scenario to explore, other scenarios exist, such as Brandon stumbled, lost, or broke his phone and continued walking. In fact, the bloodhound evidence is more suggestive of the second scenario. While the dog did at one point jump into the Yellow Medicine River, it came out again and continued with good purpose of movement, suggesting that the trail continued. The dog was able to follow the trail until just shy of another gravel road. When a dog stops trailing, this doesn't necessarily mean the trail ends. It simply means that the dog is at the end of its nose time. This was over a 3-mile trail, which is a relatively long trail. And again, how accurate is that trail scent after moving through water? I mean, I imagine it can't be that accurate. The search planning process. Every search manager must deal with 2 fundamental questions during a missing person search. Where do we search, and how do we search? This section describes the ways the planning team decided where to search in the Brandon Swanson case. There are standard practices taught by both the so-called land search and rescue community, example NASAR, and the so-called mathematical model, the Air Force's Inland Search and Rescue Planning course. There are 4 standard methods used to determine the overall search area and initial search priorities. 1. Theoretical maximum distance traveled. This is simply the rate of travel multiplied by the time traveled. Since the average person between walks 1 and 3 miles per hour and Brandon walked between 47 and 53 minutes, this gives us a 0.75 to 2.5 mile initial planning ring. On the master map, the minimum distance is designed with diamonds and the maximum distance is designated with diamonds and the maximum distance by triangles. 2. Statistical. Retrospective studies based on International Search and Rescue Incident Database found that in these circumstances, abandoned vehicles, subjects were found 5.6 miles from the last known position 95% of the time, yielding a total search area of 98.5 square miles. The median distance is 1.3 miles, a 5.3 square mile search area. I mean, these are very important statistics here, because if this is 95% of the time, I mean, that's an overwhelming majority. Obviously, 5% of cases would be outside of that. Three subjective considerations. This includes evaluating attractants, navigational aids, and navigational barriers that might influence where Brandon would go. This yielded a number of investigative clues that helped us set initial search priorities. The following subjective considerations were evaluated in this case. Attractants, principally lights from the surrounding area. The most visible man-made light in the area was the prominent glow from the east-southeast in the direction of Minnesota, although it is likely that this was a glow of lights from Marshall. There was a scattering of individual lights in all directions. None stood out. Navigational aids, county roads. For the majority of the 47-minute conversation, Brandon traveled along one of the gravel roads. The glow of lights in the distance. Brandon believed he was oriented to his location. Navigational barriers. Yellow Medicine River to the south, although multiple bridges crossed the river. Mud Creek to the north, although multiple bridges crossed the creek. And Highway 68 south-southeast. 4. Deductive reasoning. We came up with and evaluated a number of scenarios that might explain the circumstances of his disappearance. Known. On May 15, 2008, Brandon left a gathering in Canby to drive home to Marshall, where he drove west down a field road, attempted to turn south onto a gravel road, and became stuck. He believed he was somewhere between Marshall and Lind. Between 2:15 and 2:25 a.m., he left his car and began walking. He was attempting to meet his parents at the Linwood Tavern. At the end of a 47-minute cell phone conversation, Brandon uttered an expletive, and the phone went dead. Due to the nature of this case, planners evaluated two separate sets of scenarios. What direction Brandon might have headed during the phone conversation, and what happened after the cell phone went dead. A. Initial direction of travel scenarios during his cell phone conversation. Brandon traveled easterly, due east across the Field Road, 395th Street, 110th Ave, and Congers Marsh, east on Lyon Yellow Medicine Road, south on Lyon Lincoln County Road, east on 390th Street towards Taunton. That was the initial direction of travel scenarios. That was the easterly direction. There's also the south, and then there's also westerly towards Porter. If Brandon intended to go west from his last known position, he only had two choices if he wanted to walk along a road. One, to go south along the road he was on and turn west to the nearest intersection, or two, go north and turn west. Either way, he would likely turn west at the nearest opportunity. So, south on Lyon Lincoln County Road, west on 390th Street, then either south on 270th Street to Highway 68 or north on 270th Street, north on Lyon Lincoln County Road, west on 400th Street, or north on Lyon Lincoln County Road, west on 170th Avenue or 180 or 190. Or if Brandon traveled northerly on Lyon Lincoln County Road or northeasterly. B. Scenarios after phone went dead. 1. Brandon was killed at the point the phone went dead, or became immobilized by injury and later perished in the same area. Notes: Brandon was traveling cross country at the time. During the 47-minute conversation, Brandon likely traveled between 3/4 of a mile to 2.5 miles. Brandon might have drowned in one of the many waterways in the area, or Brandon stumbled, injured himself, thereby becoming immobilized, and later succumbed to the cold weather. 2. Brandon slipped and his phone was somehow rendered inoperable, but he was able to continue walking. Under this scenario, 1. Brandon became wet from falling wet grass and or sweating from the exertion of walking and became hypothermic over time, eventually succumbing to it, or Brandon eventually fell into some sort of well, cistern, or tank and perished there. Or 3. Brandon was picked up by someone and taken outside of the search area. Under these scenarios, 1. Brandon was later harmed by whoever picked him up, or 2. Brandon obtained a ride from someone who was able to transport him to safety, and Brandon is alive and well and living elsewhere. I mean, there's another scenario there, too. If whoever gave him a ride, then he went elsewhere and someone else harmed him, not the person who gave him a ride, unbeknownst to the person who gave him a ride. And if the person who gave him a ride didn't want to become suspected by authorities as the last known person to have seen him, he might have kept quiet about it. Planning scenarios discussion. This is the process we use to evaluate the various scenarios regarding what happened to Brandon before and after the cell phone went dead. Feel free to add to the arguments. Initial direction of travel scenarios during the cell phone conversation. 1. Brandon traveled due east across the Field Road, 395th Street to 110th Ave and around Congers Marsh, and then east on Lion Yellow Medicine Road. Arguments 4. Brandon may have been backtracking his route. It is unknown in what direction he thought the Linwood Tavern laid. That's a good point. Arguments against. Brandon thought he was between Marshall and Lind. There is no evidence that he was backtracking towards Marshall. Also a good point. 2. Brandon traveled east by first going south on Lyon-Lincoln County Road, then east on 390th Street. Arguments 4. Taunton was the closest town to the last known position. During the cell phone call, he stayed on the Minnesota Tower. Arguments against. Taunton was nearly invisible. No glow of lights. 3. Brandon traveled south on Lyon-Lincoln Road. Arguments 4. None known. Arguments against. He would have reached the highway within the 47-minute conversation. If so, he would have likely mentioned it to his parents. No mention was made. 4. Brandon traveled westerly by first going south on Lyon-Lincoln County Road, west on 390th Street, then either south on 270th Street to Highway 68 or north on 270th Street. If Brandon intended to go west from his last known position, he had only 2 choices if he wanted to walk along the road. 1, to go south along the road he was on and turn west at the nearest intersection, or 2, go north and turn west. Either way, he would likely turn west at the nearest opportunity. Arguments 4. Brandon's vehicle was heading west when it went into the ditch. Accordingly, he likely thought his destination was to the west or northwest. The brightest glow in the sky was Minnesota, which was east-southeast of Brandon's last known position. He would likely have thought that this was Marshall and headed away from it towards where he thought Lind was located. At one point in the conversation, when asked on which side of the road his car was located on, he replied on the left side. This indicates that he was facing south at the time, which may suggest an intended direction of travel. Later, he mentioned that he could clearly see the moon, suggesting that it was within his field of vision. At the time he was walking, the moon was due west of his position near or at the horizon. While certainly a soft clue, this suggests that he may have been heading westerly at the time he made the statement. Brandon stated that he believed he was on the road between Savannah Hills Golf Course and Lind. He also believed that he is just off Highway 23. If one compares the relative positions of Marshall, the Linwood Tavern, and Highway 23 with the positions of Minnesota, Highway 68, a westerly direction of travel makes sense. Also, the trail established by trailing dog on day 2 of the search. Arguments against. Porter is farther away than Taunton, but Brandon probably didn't know that. 5. Brandon traveled westerly by first going north on Lyon-Lincoln County Road, then west on 400th Street. Arguments 4. Brandon's vehicle was heading west when it went into the ditch. Accordingly, he likely thought his destination was to the west. The brightest glow in the sky was Minnesota, which was east-southeast of Brandon's last known position. He would likely have thought that this was Marshall and headed away from it towards where he thought Lind was located. Later, he mentioned that he could clearly see the moon, suggesting that it was within his field of vision. At the time he was walking, the moon was due west of his position, near or at the horizon. While certainly a soft clue, this suggests that he may have been heading westerly at the time he made his statement. Brandon stated that he believed he was on the road between Savannah Hills Golf Course and Lind. He also believed that he is just off Highway 23. If one compares the relative positions of Marshall, the Lindwood Tavern, and Highway 23 with the positions of Minnesota and Highway 68, a westerly direction of travel makes sense. Arguments against. At one point in the conversation, when asked on which side of the road his car was located, he replied on the left side. This indicates that he was facing south at that time, which may suggest an intended direction of travel toward the south. Porter is farther away than Taunton, but Brandon probably didn't know that. 6. Brandon traveled westerly by first going north on Lyon-Lincoln County Road, then west on 170th Ave, or 180 or 190. Arguments 4. He may have decided to turn west at any intersection. Arguments against. If he wanted to head west, it is more likely that he turned west to the nearest opportunity. The phone conversation suggests that he was single-minded in his determination to go to the tavern. 7. Brandon traveled north on the Lyon-Lincoln County Road. Arguments 4. There was a direct line of travel north. It is unknown in which direction he thought Lindwood Tavern laid. Arguments against. At some point in the conversation, he left the road and went cross-country. So it is clear that Brandon believed that the tavern was not in a direct path along the road. Good point. 8. Brandon traveled northeasterly. Arguments 4, none known. Arguments against, none known. Scenarios after the phone went dead. 1. Brandon was killed at the point the phone went dead or became immobilized by injury and later perished in the same area. Notes, Brandon was traveling cross country at the time. During the 47-minute conversation, Brandon likely traveled between 3/4 to 2.5 miles. Under this scenario, Brandon drowned in one of the many waterways in the area. Possible waterways include the Yellow Medicine River to the south and west, the Mud Creek to the north, any of the many drainage ditches in the area. Arguments 4. During the phone conversation, Brandon noted hearing moving water nearby. Drowning would certainly account for Brandon's disappearance. Water searches are difficult to search to a 100% probability of detection. Therefore, it is possible that he is still missing in the 3/4 to 2.5 mile search radius from the last known position. Arguments against. While it is clear that Brandon's phone was rendered inoperable when he uttered the expletive, that's actually not clear. It is dangerous to assume that Brandon was unable to continue walking after that point. The area within the 3/4 to 2.5 mile radius from the last known position has been extensively searched without success, especially the Yellow Medicine River, suggesting that Brandon is located elsewhere. If Brandon stumbled, injured himself, therefore becoming immobilized, and later succumbed to the cold weather. Arguments 4. During the night in question, it was nearly certain that an immobile subject would have become hypothermic, especially with the light clothing that Brandon was wearing. Arguments against. A subject located on the ground within the 3/4 to 2.5 miles radius from the last known position would likely have been found by now. And you know what's curious? He said located on the ground, not high up in a tree. Another scenario, Brandon slipped and his phone was somehow rendered inoperable, but he was able to continue walking. Brandon became wet from falling, wet grass, and or sweating from the exertion of walking, and became hypothermic over time, eventually succumbing to it. Arguments 4. One cannot assume that Brandon stopped moving at the point the cell phone went dead. Cell phones are relatively fragile devices. The area within the 3/4 to 2.5 mile radius from the last known position has been searched extensively without success, suggesting that Brandon is located elsewhere. Per Robert Coaster in Lost Person Behavior, Hill, in an examination of suspended searches, found that in almost every case, the search planners failed to search outside the median. In this case, the median distance is 1.3 miles, which has been searched extensively. Statistically, there is a 50% chance that Brandon will be located beyond this distance. Arguments against, none known. Another scenario here, Brandon eventually fell into some sort of well, cistern, or tank and perished there. Arguments 4. This scenario would certainly account for why no one has spotted his body. Arguments against. Modern well casings for residential use are generally 4 to 6 inches in diameter, small enough for a puppy to fall into, but not a human. Municipal and commercial casings are often in the range of 16 to 20 inches in diameter, which is large enough to fall into. However, there are none in the area that aren't enclosed in buildings. The only well that is large enough for an adult male to fall into that would have been accessible to Brandon is a hand-dug brick or timber-lined well. Any in the area would be over 100 years old and most likely be collapsed. An intact pioneer well is an exceptionally rare thing in this area if they are in the area at all. The likelihood that he found the one intact pioneer well in the entire region is extremely low. For many years, Minnesota law has required that old wells and cisterns be filled in or capped. A more likely possibility is falling into a cistern. Many, if not most, old farms in the area had one. Windmills would pump water into a cistern where it would be more readily accessible. They are often covered with a wooden covering which can rot away. While all the teams that have been looking for them, none have been found. There just aren't a lot of abandoned farms within the search area. We have found at least 3 old farmsteads on the map that have been completely wiped off the land. The farmland in this area is so valuable that every footing, cistern, and piece of concrete has been removed. All of the search teams that I have worked with on this search are aware of old cisterns and the like. The 3 or 4 abandoned farms we have found have been searched thoroughly. Another scenario, Brandon was picked up by someone and taken outside of the search area. Brandon was later harmed by whoever picked him up. Arguments 4, none known. Arguments against, the likelihood of meeting a predator in this rural area on a weeknight is quite remote. Another scenario, Brandon obtained a ride from someone who was able to transport him to safety, and Brandon is alive and well and living elsewhere. Arguments 4, none known. Arguments against, Brandon did not have any means of supporting himself. Other possible scenarios. Brandon was disoriented because he was taken against his will, blindfolded, and driven to the ditch location by an unknown operator. 2. Unknown operator leaves Brandon in the car at the ditch, and while unknown is gone, Brandon escapes. But wouldn't he have mentioned something to his parents? Unless he did, and the parents were told by the FBI not to mention that information. 3. Unknown operator catches up with Brandon in the woods, incapacitates him, and is driven away in another vehicle. 4, this explains the disorientation and why a body has never been found in the search area. So yeah, I mean, a lot of possibilities here, but that was a very detailed write-up there. Another update here, also on the wikiversity.org. Search and Rescue Mission 2008, difference between revisions. Agricultural field. The fields within 2-3 miles of the last known position were searched early. Because the fields were not planted yet or newly planted with no growth, PODs were relatively high. The canine teams initially avoided searching fields for several reasons. 1, assumption that few fields had been planted when Brandon went missing, therefore the farmers would have found him while planting. 2, farmers tend to be very sensitive about crop damage, and we wanted to avoid that issue. 3, the constant wind blowing through the area allowed the dogs to effectively sample many of the fields from their edges. Once we determined that the remains were likely within the Mud Creek drainage, we found that over 60% of the fields in that area had already been planted when Brandon went missing. We felt we could no longer ignore the fields. This occurred in the late spring of 2009. Since then, we have been systematically detail searching each of the fields in the area, an exhausting process. Recently, 5 different HRD dogs gave full trained final responses on a field cultivator sitting by the side of a field. This may or may not indicate that the body is scattered in a nearby field. This is one of the more puzzling findings. Okay, so this is not 1 dog. This is not 2. This is not 3. This is not 4. This is 5 different certified dogs hitting on a field cultivator. The same field cultivator. He doesn't state which it is. Wow. That's quite mind-shocking. I mean, we mentioned it in the previous episode, but like, yeah, 5 different dogs. Crazy. He also answers some questions here regarding, this is once again Jeff Hayes. What are the sizes of the fields? They range from 40 acres to 640 acres, 1 square mile. 80 and 160 are common. What is planted in the fields in the prior crop year? Primarily corn and soybeans. Had the fields been planted, approximately 60% of the fields to the northwest of the last known position were planted prior to Brandon's disappearance. How high was the water in the river? Approximately 2 to 3 feet. One official has stated that there may be holes as deep as 6 to 10 feet, but we haven't seen any along this stretch of river. So the river is 2 to 3 feet. I mean, that's not that deep. Also, someone asked here, is it true that cell phone company records were used to find the car? He responded, yes. And this was based on Brandon being connected to the tower just south of Minnesota during all of the phone calls that evening. Interesting comment here. I have read on the web that Brandon wore his phone on a sterling silver chain. Is that true, or did he clip it to his jeans? Or wear it around his neck and stick the phone in a shirt pocket? Haas responds, that is interesting. I hadn't heard that one before. I believe he kept his phone in his pocket. The necklace was decorative. I mean, if that can be verified that his phone was physically connected to a chain, then that it wouldn't be separated from his body. I mean, that would be curious. So regarding the dogs, Haas said they have 573 discoveries that suggest that this trail that he mentioned is reliable regarding the dog trail. Okay, curious points here. Back to the web sleuths. I don't get it. If he was drunk to the point of his senses being impeded, how come his father didn't pick up on it on a near 2-hour phone call? I could understand if he spoke to his parents for like 5 minutes before the call dropped, but he was on the call for a long time. He would have been slurring and missing words or rambling. You can clearly tell when someone's drunk on a phone call, yet his father didn't say anything about it. Years ago, I thought he might have been bitten by a snake or something. The expletive is entirely dependent on the tone of his voice when he said it. If he said it because he realized he forgot something from his car or walked too far out, it would sound a lot different in urgency than him saying it because he was about to slip down a ditch into a river. I hope we find out some answers about what happened to him. And that's a point I made in episode 1. Exactly how did he say it? Because that is huge. That is huge. Another post here regarding the Jeff Hayes write-ups, which I just went over. I missed those. It was quite an eye-opening experience. It completely concluded the entire case in my mind. Everything I stated prior still remains true in my opinion as far as it being accidental, but my theory was missing in two pieces. To me, they were unimportant pieces and not needed to come to a proper conclusion, but it sure helps to finish putting the puzzle together. That was the nature of the accident and what happened to his body. I think those links you posted definitely puts to rest both of these now. It undoubtedly explains the missing body part of the saga. However, there could still be a tad of mystery concerning whether or not he got injured prior to his death. Still, as I stated previously, the only thing that separated this story from any other typical everyday run-of-the-mill accidental death was the missing body. Only that in and of itself, it's not like there were other clues, such as blood spots or missing shoes or shell casings. Just missing, in this case, is what created the entire mystery. Had the body been found in a field somewhere and an autopsy said he died of hypothermia, this case would have never gotten off the ground. So never was there any doubt in my mind he had some type of accident, but now after reviewing your links, concluded that the accident was hypothermia is what ultimately did him in. I mean, the facts speak for themselves. The temperatures were in the high 30s, and he was soaking wet, and he had not been dressed for the outdoors, and been exposed for at least a couple hours, and was physically exhausted. His body was depleted. That is, hands down, the absolute perfect situation for a death by cold. The perfect recipe for disaster. Many, many people have died of hypothermia in far less severe conditions than that. The only question left was, why did no one find the body? But after reading that 5 very trained dogs all hit on his last location as being in front of a combine parked on the side of the field, well, I mean, seriously, what more does a person need? Yep, case closed for me. As far as I am personally concerned, this is what happened to him. He got lost, he got wet, he got hypothermia, he died, he got chewed up by a combine after he died. This also explains why the body was never located even 10 years later, considering that active searches are still taking place that make it even more believable. And these are not just regular searches, these people are experts and have everything laid out and mapped out in a grid-like style. They are not leaving any stone unturned and have not come across any bones yet. A lot of people have gone missing, but years later the remains were found by a hiker or someone riding a bike or blah blah. But his never have. Only possible question that remain is whether or not the driver of the combine was aware he had run over a body and have absolutely no experience at such things. Maybe someone reading this does. I don't know whether or not a combine machine could handle chewing up a body without the operator being fully aware of it. I would lean towards yes, it could happen. But without knowing how loud they are, how powerful they are, or how many acres he was doing, I would have no idea. As well, the pattern in which he used. Also, how often do these operators drive these combines in a drunken stupor or with headphones on listening to music? If it was a large area, he wasn't going straight back and forth, meaning he was moving in an outer square-like pattern. It's more than plausible that on a return trip, he wouldn't have even spotted the remains. Assuming they would still be there anyway, if a combine is powerful enough, maybe it can chew up a body and spit it out into the back holding compartment. I'm just as clueless about that. I think, however, at this point, it's such an extremely minor detail that it's just not relevant at all as whether or not the operator did or didn't know. And what I went over in episode 1, too, maybe the operator thought it was like a dead deer or something. They might have not thought it was a human body. Another point regarding Israel Keys. Israel Keys was traveling May 11th through May 17th, 2008. He was known to stalk state parks. Brandon's car was found near a state park. Israel Keys liked to make his murders look like accidents or lost hikers. What would you say if you came across a stranger in the middle of the night in the middle of nowhere? Oh, expletive. Those were his last words on the phone. Still trying to link Israel Keys to Minnesota in this time, but I know that it's a state on the FBI's list. There's another article regarding whether or not Brandon was drunk or not. This was on fhsvoice.org, The Strange and Abnormal, The Unfortunate Disappearance of Brandon Swanson by Ava Ferrigno, November 10th, 2018. So it states that a volunteer firefighter that looked over the search and rescue noted that both the people at the party and Brandon's parents said he seemed fine and not intoxicated. Interesting. Here's another interesting post that we haven't... there's an interesting idea here. Do we know roughly where Brandon's dad looked for him? I have read between Marshall and Lind is where Brandon thought he was. I also read about a golf course and a dirt road. The course is on the northeast part of town, while the tavern, I believe, is 106 East Railroad Street, Lind, Minnesota, which is in the southwest part of town. Lind kind of looks like a pencil on a slant. The two locations are in the exact opposite direction. Knowing where his dad looked might not seem that important, but it could lead to ideas that Brandon didn't want to be found, or possibly someone with Brandon that made him lie to his father. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we've discussed, did he have another individual with him? And how would that play out if he did? Another interesting post here. I actually had someone tell me they knew someone who knew what happened, and that he was buried in someone's basement. I suggested they report it to authorities. Who knows if they did? So, is this a local or someone connected to a local who made this statement? Now, here's the thing. I mean, we're talking college-age kids. They make up rumors while drunk at parties, etc. Could this report be genuine? Genuine in the sense that someone did claim that as some kind of like bad joke or whatever. They didn't know they were joking, whatever. They reported it to somebody else. Some more points regarding Israel Keys. Supposedly, Israel Keys was very into gambling, and it appears committed crimes near or in the radius of casinos. There are about a dozen casinos near Lind and or Marshall. Also, Israel Keys was familiar with and frequently used County Route 3. Brandon's call had been routed through a tower at the intersection of County Route 3 and 10. Obviously not a smoking gun coincidence, but wow, I mean, yeah, this is kind of crazy. Like, when I first read about the Israel Keys connection, I was like, like, there's not enough there. I mean, it's the circumstantial evidence is stacking up here with Israel Keys. I mean, that's kind of crazy. I mean, I still don't think there's enough there, but I mean, it's clearly more than zero. The VICAP is definitely curious too, because what information could they possibly have to put them on the VICAP unless they have other information from another source like Israel Keys that could warrant that? I mean, it's kind of weird. And there was also, of course, the dog hit in Mud Creek, which is quite a bit of distance away, which is kind of weird as well. Huh. Is it possible he was at both locations and someone did pick him up in a car and then disposed of him elsewhere? But then wouldn't they have found him in Mud Creek? Yeah, I mean, there's just so many questions with very few answers. Let's circle all the way back to the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit. The next point here. A pipe was found in Brandon's car. This was confirmed on the Nancy Grace segment. It is not specified what type. Of course, a lot of teenagers smoke pot, and this doesn't really prove anything, but at least somewhat helps support the theory. Allegedly, at least one of the partygoers claimed, not to authorities but to a local, that Brandon was very intoxicated, interesting, upon leaving the party. This could explain his disorientation. Though authorities claim that they didn't think he was intoxicated, I have a feeling that the partygoers were being tight-lipped for a reason. Perhaps he had been accused of snitching on someone, and his friends had known about it, but were scared of being next. Wow. Wow, that is curious. Brandon was taking back roads instead of the main highway. Perhaps he was trying to avoid someone specific, besides the cops. Another mind shock there. It's been almost 10 years, not a single trace of Brandon or his phone has been discovered. The area has been searched extensively. Thousands of professional man-hours have been put into it, but still nothing. Another interesting yet unexplained tidbit was that apparently Brandon's car doors were opened upon discovery. This was confirmed on Charlie Project, and in my opinion, points strongly to foul play. So yeah, a lot of good points there. Another interesting post regarding if he was accidentally run over by a tractor or accidentally killed in some other fashion by one of the landowners. Insurance or liability is also a possible motive for no remains being found if his death was accidental, or rather lack of insurance. At that level of trouble, you're easily in umbrella territory, and I'm not sure everyone has those levels of coverage protection. And yeah, I mean, that's a great point there. So what does everybody think about this, all this new information, a possible Israel Keys connection, or possibly being removed from the area via car? I mean, there's a lot of theories here. There's a lot of theories. At this point, I'm not even sure what to state. I think it's still, if we put a lot of stock in 5 different search dogs hitting on that piece of farm equipment, it's kind of hard to ignore that. So, and if that's the same area where they graded the road, If that's the same person who owns that farm, I mean, that's almost a slam dunk there. Still doesn't quite explain the dog hit at Mud Creek, though. Yeah, that's tough. That's tough. But I hope everybody found another edition of MindShock True Crime interesting and informative. If you want to help support the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Help us get more mind-shocking content out there and keep up awareness in cold cases, missing persons cases, unresolved mysteries of all kinds, and other topics. You could also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Help support the channel that way. Get access to exclusive streams and chats. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and like and share. Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon, and Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcast, or requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.